Chapter 1331. Jade Emperor. Are you trying to renege on your debt? Hearing what the Jade Emperor said, the 6 great sages suddenly began to clamor. That's right. No, your people were the ones who acted shamelessly first. If Liuyan Ling had not used some underhanded method, how could she have defeated Patriarch Lu? Qing Emperor Xiaohao said with a grimace. The 6 great sages were so angry that they fainted. They did not expect the people of the heavenly court to be so shameless. All right then, Qing Emperor, please tell us what underhanded method Miss Ling used. Tell us. Heaven's equal Jendi asked Qing Emperor Xiaohao. This. Qing Emperor was speechless. He could not think of what underhanded method Liuyan Ling had used to escape the gold chakram's attack. According to Qing Emperor's knowledge, there was no one below the Emperor sword level who could avoid the gold chakram. Ridiculous. Qing Emperor, you don't know either. How dare you say such a thing? The Azure Emperor's reaction caused the allied army to roar with laughter. The Azure Emperor, Xiaohao, who cared about his reputation the most, immediately paled in anger. He said, "All right, I can't think of anything. Then please tell me how that bastard from the Liu Nian family won." Aside from prehistoric desolate eon experts, no one can dodge the attack of the diamond chakram, nor can anyone remain clear-headed under its attack. Because the gold chakram did not hit me, a figure suddenly walked out of the void. His expression was calm and elegant, and he appeared in the middle of the 11 primordial desolation realm expert. Who are you? Qing Emperor frowned when he saw the woman suddenly appear. He said unhappily, "This is a place for us adults to talk. Since when did you children have the right to interrupt? That's strange. Didn't you ask me how I defeated Lu Dongbin?" The woman smiled disdainfully and looked at Qing Emperor mockingly. What? The 5 heavenly emperors were stunned. Jade Emperor was the first to react. He asked coldly, "Who are you? What's your name?" "I am Liuyan Ling." Liuyan Ling replied calmly. "What? If you're Liuyan Ling, then who was the person fighting with Ancestor Lu just now?" Liuyan Ling's reply shocked the heavenly court's side. They couldn't understand how Liuyan Ling had turned into a completely different person in the blink of an eye. Only the Jade Emperor seemed to have understood something. His eyes sharpened. "Miss Ling, please explain to these careless people. Otherwise, they won't be able to figure out what's going on in their entire lives." Wu Zetian laughed. Liuyan Ling nodded. Just as she was about to explain, the Jade Emperor waved his hand and rudely cut her off. "There's no need for you to explain. I already know what's going on." The heavenly court's people immediately looked at the Jade Emperor in confusion. The Jade Emperor sneered and said, "You guys really have good methods, good schemes. You actually let the main character hide in the void and let your sword lady pretend to be you to fight with Ancestor Lu. You guys are really vicious." Hearing the Jade Emperor's words, most of the heavenly court's Yuan Ku instantly understood what was going on. Because Liuyan Ling was a complete stranger, no Yuan Ku in the heavenly court knew what Liuyan Ling looked like. Therefore, Liuyan Ling had sent her sword lady, Goddess Soaring Sky, to pretend to be Liuyan Ling fighting Ancestor Lu. On the other hand, the real lingering fleeting time was hiding in the void, controlling the billion sword art to pretend that it was the Soaring Sky goddess who was using it. Because they saw Goddess Soaring Sky use the billion swords technique, Lu Dongbin and the heavenly court's people naturally thought that Goddess Soaring Sky was Liuyan Ling. When Lu Dongbin smashed Goddess Soaring Sky's head with the diamond chakram, the result of the battle was already decided. After losing his last trump card, Lu Dongbin was naturally killed by Liuyan Ling's billion swords technique. But that's not right. If that Liuyan Ling was the sword lady, then it's impossible that we didn't recognize her. Qing Emperor Xiaohao, who was sitting on the throne, suddenly shouted. This caused the others to be confused. Although the sword lady looked very similar to humans, they were fundamentally different. For example, the dimensional aura that constantly surrounded the sword lady was something that normal humans would never have. After fighting with the sword lady for so long, the Yuan Ku had already grasped a method to distinguish the sword lady from the sword bearer. If this Liuyan Ling was the sword lady, then it was impossible that they didn't recognize her. My Liuyan clan has countless methods. It's just a method to hide the dimensional aura. What's the big deal? Liuyan Ling said coldly. Only then did the Jade Emperor remember that the Kunzu clan had indeed invented a method to hide the Sword Lady's dimensional aura. This method could only be used by the Liuyan clan's billion swords technique. So after the Liuyan clan was destroyed, this method no longer appeared in the world. These Yuan Ku naturally forgot about this. Adding on the fact that the Liuyan clan's usual style of fighting was for the sword bearer to charge forward, Lu Dongbin didn't suspect the Sword Lady's identity at all. He thought that she was the real sword bearer. That was why he suffered such a huge loss and died in Liuyan Ling's hands. Good. 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 The Jade Emperor said good 3 times, then looked at Liuyan Ling. We would like to ask you, what happened to the Sword Lady who died in your place? It's broken. Liuyan Ling said calmly. At this moment, the soaring Sword Lady's charred corpse was blown away by a gust of wind. All the black ash disappeared in an instant, revealing the soaring sword that had been broken into several pieces. The soaring sky sword was an immortal sword maiden, yet it was forcibly broken into several pieces by the diamond chakram and 9 yang true thunder. From this, one could see how terrifying the diamond chakram and 9 yang true thunder were. If Liuyan Ling had been the one to bear all this herself, the one to die would have been Liuyan Ling. How vicious. You actually let your own Sword Lady die in your place. I'm afraid that even my good-for-nothing younger brother can't compare to your viciousness. The Jade Emperor couldn't help but exclaim, if Sword Emperor Liu Cheng, who defended Yangjing City to the death, was as ruthless as you are, he wouldn't have died in our hand. Drifting Goblet Jendi was the strongest existence between Yuan Ku and the humans. If Drifting Goblet Jendi wanted to escape, he could definitely do so. However, in order to cover the escape of the humans in Yangjing City, Sword Emperor Liu Shou had actually sacrificed his own life. It could be said that he was extremely selfless. That was why the Jade Emperor praised Drifting Goblet. After being chased by you for 800 years, it's time for our Liuyan clan to learn to be more obedient. Liuyan Ling said coldly. It's just an immortal sword lady. Our Liuyan clan still has some emperor bloodline. We can just reactivate the worldly furnace and bring her back. It's not a big deal. Ha ha ha. Good. Very good. The Jade Emperor laughed. As for how sincere his laughter was, only the heavens knew. It looks like that woman from the Liuyan clan knows junior brother like the back of her hand. She also knew about the diamond chakram and purposely set up this trap to harm junior brother, said the South Pole Immortal Hermit. The South Pole Immortal Hermit was the same as Lu Dongbin. They were both inner disciples of old Lord Taishang. Furthermore, the South Pole Immortal Hermit was the chief disciple of old Lord Taishang, so he naturally had special feelings for ancestor Lu. That's right. That woman must have known that the diamond chakram was in ancestor Lu's hands. That's why she set up such a sinister trap and used her sword lady's life to cover for herself. Azure Emperor Xiaohao immediately agreed. However, there's something I don't understand. My junior brother has never shown the diamond chakram to outsiders. Apart from me, no one else knows that the diamond chakram is in junior brother's hands. How did Liuyan Ling know all this and set up a trap for junior brother? Thinking of this, the South Pole Immortal Hermit was puzzled. The South Pole Immortal Hermit had no idea that the real Lu Dongbin had already died hundreds of years ago. The function of the diamond chakram had already been left behind by the 19th generation ancestor who had killed him. At the same time, Liuyan Ling, who was familiar with the clan's history, deeply remembered it. As soon as Lu Dongbin appeared, he had nowhere to hide in front of Liuyan Ling. All his trump cards were exposed. Liuyan Ling immediately discussed with Guhan through telepathy for a few minutes. In the end, Guhan used the characteristics of the diamond chakram to set up a trap for Lu Dongbin. As for the soaring sky sword that was broken into several pieces, it was actually sacrificed. However, Guhan and Liuyan Ling did not feel bad about it. Don't forget that this was a dungeon. All the sword ladies were a string of data. The real soaring sky sword was still in the real world. Sacrificing the soaring sky sword was not a psychological burden for Guhan and Liuyan Ling, all right. Now that all the facts are clear, it's time to announce our victory. The 6 great sages said happily. Jade Emperor, Quickly add 6 emperor positions to the investiture of the gods. From now on, we will be a family. Nonsense. You are clearly acting shamelessly. How can a swordsman hide in the void and use a sword lady to deceive others? This battle doesn't count. You have lost. Qing Emperor Xiaohao said forcefully. The Jade Emperor, who was sitting in the middle, did not say a word. However, the heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals behind him began to move at the same time. The entire war was like a seamless war machine, constantly approaching Yuan Ku's allied army. Obviously, the Jade Emperor did not intend to fulfill his promise. Wait. Seeing the heavenly court's army's actions, the 6 great sages seemed to be frightened. They immediately admitted defeat. How about this? This battle doesn't count. Let's continue with the third battle. The heavenly court ignored the words of the 6 great sages. Even if they won the third round, it would be a draw with 1 win and 1 loss in the end. This was meaningless to the heavenly court, so they were still crushing the coalition army step by step. The first battle doesn't count either. Orokai, who was panicking to the extreme, finally threw away his last bit of bottom line. The third battle. We will use the third battle as the final decision. Whoever wins the third battle will be the final winner. Dong. The advancing heavenly court army stopped in an instant. The Jade Emperor was a man who cared about his reputation. At the same time, he was afraid that he would really lose a few great emperors in the battle with the allied army. Now that the 6 great sages were so cowardly, he had to stop while he was ahead. He nodded calmly and said, "All right, this will be your punishment for acting shamelessly in the second battle. We will use the third battle to determine who is the winner." Chapter 1332. Your Majesty, who do you intend to send out for the third round? Azure Emperor Xiaohao asked the Jade Emperor curiously from his throne. Do you even need to ask? Other than that guy, who else can guarantee that they will win the next round? The Jade Emperor rolled his eyes at his younger brother. Of course. It's just that if we send that guy down, it might be another. Qing Emperor Xiaohao had a rare look of worry on his face. Shut up. Don't mention that name in front of me. The Jade Emperor glared at Xiaohao fiercely. Xiaohao trembled in fear. Only then did he realize that he had unknowingly violated the Jade Emperor's taboo. He hurriedly said, "Please forgive me, Your Majesty, I didn't mean to." "All right. Go find that woman and tell her what to do. I'm curious what kind of opponent these 6 great sages will send out. The remaining Lu Ban isn't even as strong as Liuanian Ling. I don't believe these guys will use Lu Ban as their final trump card. They might even have a second Liuanian Ling hidden." The final opponent of the allied forces was naturally our student Guhan. When the Jade Emperor and Odin threw out the names in their hands at the same time, Guhan walked out from the crowd and appeared in front of everyone in the heavenly court for the first time. What? It's a spirit sword rank sword wielder. Oh my god. They actually sent out a spirit sword rank sword wielder. Seeing Guhan appear in front of them, everyone in the heavenly court, including the 5 great emperors, was stunned. They never expected that the last person to appear in the allied forces would be a spirit sword rank sword wielder. Could it be that the Yuan Ku allied forces were so miserable that they couldn't even send out a third immortal sword rank sword wielder and had no choice but to find a spirit sword rank sword wielder to make up the numbers? It seems like these 6 guys have completely given up and are ready to accept the title of Great Sage. That's why they sent out a spirit sword rank sword wielder. They want to deliberately lose to us just to look good. Scarlet Emperor South Pole Immortal Wang said coldly, as if he had already seen through Yuan Ku's plan. That's right. They actually sent out a spirit sword level sword wielder. It seems like they really don't want to fight anymore. White Emperor Go Chen said. He felt that this was the case. No, it's not that simple. On the other hand, the Jade Emperor's eyes were filled with suspicion. Since that person from the Liuanian family could disguise himself as the Sword Lady, why can't this guy disguise himself as a spirit sword rank cultivator? This guy is the same as you and that Liuanian Ling. They are humans that we have never heard of. I'm afraid they are in cahoots with each other. These 2 guys and other humans have probably been hiding in a place we have never been aware of to recuperate. Since these two dared to come out from a safe place where they were struggling at death's door, I'm afraid each of them has extraordinary strength. They came to deal with the heavenly court. This human must be hiding some powerful ability. This spirit sword level identity is just to make us lower our guard. The Jade Emperor analyzed. Although the Jade Emperor's analysis was far from reality, there was one thing that he was very accurate about. Guhan was indeed very strong. He was stronger than all the immortal sword level sword wielder. The Jade Emperor was not wrong about this. If your majesty says so, won't we still lose the third round? Hearing the Jade Emperor's words, the South Pole Immortal Hermit said worriedly. It doesn't matter. The Jade Emperor waved his hand. It's best if we win. If we lose, we can use this Guhan to kill that hidden danger. It's a good thing no matter what. But if we do that, won't we still lose to those 6 guys? Go Chen said. Do you think there's any meaning in winning or losing? The Jade Emperor snorted coldly. What can these 3 small rounds decide? Didn't you see the strange movements of our Heavenly Court's army? Those 6 guys were so scared that they wet their pants. They even gave up on the 2 victories they had in their hands. From this, it can be seen that these 6 guys are all trash who are outwardly strong. If they know what's good for them, they will obediently be the great sage. If they don't know what's good for them, then they will all be destroyed. Your Majesty is wise. The other celestial emperors said in unison. Oyu Gen, at the side, looking at the name of the third round that the Jade Emperor threw out, Guhan could not help but feel puzzled. He had never heard of an immortal called Oyu General, but when this name appeared, a faint memory kept reverberating in Guhan's mind. It made Guhan think of an interesting woman. It really is her. When this Oyu Gen revealed his true appearance, a bitter smile appeared on Guhan's lips. This guy called Oyu Gen was indeed that woman. That woman who had disappeared thousands of chapters in a certain book. Oyu Gen was called Oyu Gen in the game. He was the sect master of the number 1 sword sect in the game, the Azure Wave Sword sect. He was also the biological daughter of the previous Jendi of Yuzhang City, Jiyu Jin, Jendi. Before the appearance of the military governor, this Oyu Gen had always been an influential figure in the game. It was until the appearance of the military governor and his repeated defeats of the Azure Wave Sword sect in all aspects that Oyu Gen's reputation finally fell. It was only then that the reputation of the military governor fell. It was said that after losing to the Yaoguang sword sect led by Guhan in the sect war, Oyu Gen rarely appeared in the game. It was said that he went to the real world to train himself. The Azure Wave sword sect's reputation continued to decline. Although it was still the number 1 sword sect in the world, the Yaoguang sword sect had already bitten the tail of the Azure Wave sword sect under the halo of Emperor Qin. Moreover, it was said that in 10 days, the Yaoguang sword sect would officially launch a sect war against the Azure Wave sword sect. According to the estimation of the majority of the players, the Azure Wave sword sect would most likely be defeated in this war. They would fall from the number 1 position and give way to the increasingly powerful Yaoguang sword sect. Of course, these were things that Guhan had discovered by chance while browsing the forums. He was no longer interested in the game. However, Guhan had never imagined that he would actually meet Oyu Gen here. Seems like this woman is the same as Toad, trapped in the instance dungeon and brainwash. Seeing the calm and steady Oyu Gen appear in front of him, as if he was a completely different person, Guhan thought to himself. However, what made Guhan even more curious was why the Heavenly Court would send this woman. Could it be that this woman's strength in the real world had already reached the level of an immortal sword tier sword wielder? No, even if Oyu Gen already had the strength of an immortal sword tier sword wielder, after the previous battle, the Heavenly Court should be able to understand that their strength was not inferior to Liuanian Ling's. If they wanted to obtain victory in the third round, they would have to send out the strongest immortal sword tier sword wielder, and not a woman with average strength like Oyu General in that great battle all those years ago. Guhan had personally fought with this Oyu General. Although the other party did have a decent sword technique, it was only decent. It did not even reach 1% of Liuanian Ling's, let alone Guhan's level. Even if this woman had the strength of an immortal sword tier sword wielder, so what? In the end, she would still be bullied by him. Just as Ji Han was thinking about this, the Jade Emperor in the sky said leisurely, "Sword Immortal Yang Jin, if you want to protect your godfather's life, you'd better give it your all and defeat this human. Otherwise, you know the consequences." The Jade Emperor actually called Oyu Gen Sword Immortal Yang Jin. This means that Oyu Gen already knows the truth about humans. She knows that the sword wielder is her true identity, and that the Jade Emperor used her godfather's life to force her to fight with me. Guhan looked at Oyu Gen's eyes, and found that other than coldness, there was also deep pain and helplessness, as well as a faint hint of apology. Seeing this apology, Guhan knew that he had guessed correctly. However, this was not what Guhan was most concerned about. What Guhan was most concerned about was the other party's title. It was actually Sword Immortal Yang Jin. Could it be that the other party had inherited it in this dungeon? As it turned out, Guhan had guessed correctly once again. When Guhan and Oyu Gen had not exchanged blows for long, he had been forcefully suppressed by Oyu Gen. Yes, you haven't seen it. In a contest of sword techniques, Guhan had been suppressed by Oyu General. This is definitely not a sword technique that Oyu Gen should have. In history, only a few Oyu Gen have achieved such a powerful sword technique. As expected, the one I'm fighting now isn't the real Oyu Gen, but her father, Ji Jendi. After exchanging a few dozen blows, Guhan had already guessed the truth of the matter. As the most addicted to the game and the most accomplished swordsman after Zhetian Jendi, Yang Jin Jendi was still happily playing the game until a month before his death. Therefore, the game had faithfully recorded the swordsmanship of Ji Jendi when he was at his peak. Perhaps because Oyu Gen was Yang Jin Jendi's biological daughter, all the swordsmanship memories recorded by the system had been instilled into Oyu Gen's brain. Therefore, Guhan was not fighting Oyu Gen, but Yang Jin Jendi when he was at his peak. Thinking of this, Guhan's heart was suddenly filled with lofty sentiments. Under normal circumstances, he would definitely not have the chance to fight a powerful emperor sword like Ji Jendi. Now that such a rare opportunity had been presented to him, Guhan really wanted to know who was better in swordsmanship between him and Yang Jin Jendi when he was at his peak. Therefore, a sword technique battle that left all the onlookers gasping in amazement, a virtual confrontation that spanned 80 years, began on this hastily arranged battlefield. Chapter 1333. The battle between Guhan and Oyu Gen had reached its climax from the start. Although the two of them were competing purely in terms of swordsmanship, and didn't use the power of the sword essence, it was this simple swordsmanship that caused the entire world to sink into a vast expanse of white darkness. People could only see the flashes of swords in the air, but couldn't see the specific situation. Humans really can't be underestimated. Their swordsmanship has actually reached this level. This is already close to the Tao. Seeing the battle between Oyu Gen and Ji Han, even the Jade Emperor couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. These two humans are too terrifying. Neither of them can be left alive. Otherwise, they'll definitely become a threat to us in the future, Qing Emperor said with a livid expression. He felt a strong threat from these two. Once these two became Emperor Sword-level sword-bearers, perhaps two more heaven-covering Jendi would be born. See. Let these two humans kill each other first. If Oyu Gen wins, then we'll kill her with our own hands. If that Guhan wins, then we'll force those 6 cowards to kill him, the Jade Emperor said with a sinister smile. At this time, the swordsmanship competition between Guhan and Oyu Gen had already entered a late stage. Because they were facing a late-stage Emperor Sword Jendi swordsmanship, even Guhan was at a disadvantage against this kind of swordsmanship. Fortunately, this swordsmanship was forcefully imbued into Oyu Gen's brain, so it was naturally somewhat stiff. Otherwise, Guhan would have already lost. You've lost. The sword in Oyu Gen's hand finally broke through Guhan's heavy defenses and stabbed into Guhan's forehead. Oyu Gen only needed to use a bit of force to pierce into Guhan's brain. In fact, Yujin did the same. She forcefully thrust her sword forward, but what she didn't expect was that the space between Guhan's eyebrows was abnormally hard. Her immortal ranked sword mistress was unable to pierce through Guhan's forehead and could only leave a faint bloody mark. "You're not a human." Ojin sheathed his sword and said in surprise. It was normal for Oyu-gen to make such a guess. Unless it was an emperor sword wielder, no human could use their own body to resist the sharpness of a celestial sword lady. It was impossible. "Of course I'm human. It's just that my body is a little special," Guhan replied faintly. If it weren't for the fact that Guhan's body was the meteor Yuan Ku's body, Guhan's forehead would have been pierced and he would have died on the spot. "You've already lost in terms of swordsmanship. Admit defeat now." Oyu-gen couldn't be bothered to waste any more words with Guhan. "I admit that I'm not as good as you in terms of swordsmanship, but I haven't lost yet. After all, I haven't even used my sword essence." Guhan smiled. The Chidyen sword in his hand spat out sword chi. This was the first time the Chidyen sword had spat out sword chi in this battle. This meant that Guhan had finally used his full strength. "You've already lost to me in terms of swordsmanship. So what if you use your sword essence? Don't forget, I'm an immortal sword wielder, and you're just a mere spirit sword wielder. In terms of sword essence, you and I aren't on the same level. You'll lose without a doubt." Queen Yujin snorted coldly. "I see that you are the future of humanity, so I'm reminding you to take the initiative to admit defeat now. I don't want to see the last shred of hope of humanity die by my own hands." It seemed that although this Oyu-gen worked for the heavenly court, his heart was still with humanity. He knew how to preserve a sliver of hope for humanity. "No need. Let's see who's the real deal." Guhan shrugged his shoulders. The Chidyen sword that carried sword chi directly attacked Oyu-gen. "You forced my hand." Oyu-gen's expression was pained, but he still raised his sword and clashed with Guhan. Unlike the quiet duel of pure swordsmanship earlier, when both sides used their sword essences, their combat power had reached a level that could destroy the world. Countless sword chi shot out from the hands of these two top-notch swordsmen, fighting each other in the air. When those sword chi fell to the ground, they left terrifying sword marks that were more than 10 meters deep. From this, one could see how terrifying those sword chi were. Some sword chi landed on the heavenly court and the allied army. Some Yuan Ku couldn't dodge in time and were instantly killed by the sword chi. More than 10-dimensional vortexes appeared at the same time, bringing those unlucky bastards back to their own world. These two fellows, be careful of ordinary people. Heaven's equal Jendi smiled bitterly. The Emperor's sword in his hand shot out a shield, protecting the entire allied army. This was to prevent any unlucky bastards from dying under the aftermath of these two sword chi. Heavenly Court's Scarlet Emperor South Pole Immortal Wang also followed suit and protected his own celestial soldiers and generals. For a moment, these sharp sword chi collided with the two shields, causing waves of ripples, like the surface of a lake in heavy rain. Terrifying, this shield actually consumed almost 1% of my magic power. South Pole Immortal Wang let out a surprised exclamation. Just by resisting the aftermath of the opponent's sword chi, South Pole Immortal Wang, the desolate level Yuan Ku, had actually lost 1% of his magic power. This was a bit terrifying. This Guhan was only a spirit sword wielder. How could his sword chi be so terrifying? Legend of Chaos. The moment Guhan used this move, he seemed to transcend spacetime and the void. He penetrated through the layers of sword chi laid out by Oyu-gen and instantly appeared next to her. The blade lightly touched her body, and countless sword chi flew out from the surface of Oyu-gen's body, blasting her away. Seeing Oyu-gen being blasted away, Azure Emperor Xiaohao immediately said nervously, "Did Oyu-gen lose?" "No. But it's not much different from losing. This kid has actually mastered the power of the rule." The Jade Emperor couldn't help but clench his fists. He actually felt some fear towards this kid called Jiyu Han from the bottom of his heart. "What? Big brother. You said this kid has mastered the power of the rule." Xiaohao turned pale with fright. He even forgot to address His Majesty, and directly called Jade Emperor Big Brother. "Look at Oyu-gen's body yourself. See if her body is shrouded in the power of the rule," Jade Emperor said in a deep voice. Only then did Xiaohao turn his attention to Oyu-gen, who had been blasted away. Sure enough, he found that there was a very obvious power of the rule lingering around Oyugen's body. This power of the rule was constantly affecting Oyugen, causing Oyugen to become somewhat dazed. Jade Emperor really had discerning eyes. He immediately saw that Guhan had mastered the power of the rule. This Legend of Chaos was the 5th move of the Chaos Sword technique, and it was also the most important move. It could make the sword wielder become legendary, and it could make the sword technique possess the power of the rule. This was equivalent to turning Guhan into a half-emperor level sword wielder. What kind of sword technique is this? It can actually make my sword technique uncontrollable. Actually, Guhan's move just now did not cause much damage to Oyu. General Oyugen immediately recovered to his battle-ready state. However, when Oyugen picked up his celestial sword and prepared to continue fighting, he found that his sword mistress was no longer listening to his commands. He wanted to use the snowy plum-seeking snow move, but when he actually used it, he actually forgot how to use half of it. As a result, the move became unbearably broken, and he could not block Guhan's next attack at all. He was directly hit by the chi sword in Guhan's hand. The shield on his body shook, and he lost more than 5% of his energy. What was even more frightening was that Oyugen found that he could not use the 4 skills of his sword mistress. It was as if he had forgotten how to use these 4 skills. In the end, Oyugen became a pitiful live target. He allowed Guhan to attack him, but he was unable to resist. This is the rule. This is the power of the rule. After this happened more than a dozen times, Ogen finally understood what was happening to his body. This Guhan had actually grasped the power of the rule. It was precisely because of the power of the rule that he had become a helpless puppet. No. Ordinary power of the rule is just things like wind, fire, thunder, and lightning. But this rule can make my sword technique so messy that I can't use it at all. Could it be that this person possesses the power of the rule of the sword? Oyugen crawled up from the ground in a sorry state. He finally understood. That's right. This is something only the power of the rule of the sword can do. Only the power of the rule of the sword can affect all the swords in the world, making them unable to display their true strength. This is truly a terrifying power of the rule. This guy is simply the nemesis of all sword bearers in the world. Oyugen thought to himself. Oyugen has already lost. On the throne, the Jade Emperor sighed deeply and said, I didn't expect it to be the power of the rule of the sword. No swordsman in the world can win against the power of the rule of the sword. This military governor has already won from the start. Indeed, it was just as the Jade Emperor had said. From the start, Guhan had already won. Who asked Guhan to grasp the power of the rule of the sword? This rule could affect all sword techniques in the world. Even Emperor sword mistresses were useless in front of the power of the rule of the sword. All the sword techniques they grasped would become broken, and all their skills would be unusable. This was extremely bad news for any swordsman in the world. As long as it was a swordsman, be it humans or Yuan Ku, none could be a match for Guhan. Chapter 1334. I admit defeat. After discovering that his personal shield had been broken, Oyugen, who wasn't on the same side as the Heavenly Court, immediately announced his defeat. This also meant that the Allied forces had won the 3rd battle. Your Majesty the Jade Emperor, we won again. Please fulfill your promise. The 6 great sages shouted excitedly. The Jade Emperor, who was sitting on his throne, couldn't be bothered to talk to the 6 of them anymore. He just calmly said to Qing Emperor Shao Hao beside him, do it. Yes. Your Majesty. Qing Emperor Shao Hao said excitedly. Then, he waved the flag in his hand, and the Heavenly Court's army once again charged towards Yuan Ku's allied forces. Last time, they marched slowly, but this time, the Heavenly Court's army was directly charging towards Yuan Ku's side. Their momentum was incomparably ferocious. They had clearly received the order to attack, and this was an attack that couldn't be stopped. Jade Emperor, you despicable person. You went back on your word. Seeing this, the 6 great sages immediately said angrily, honesty is for people of the same level of strength. You guys aren't strong enough, so there's no need to talk about honesty when dealing with you. The Jade Emperor didn't even care about the veil covering his face, and directly spoke the truth in his heart. Fellow Taoists, we'll have to trouble everyone to get rid of these 6 Avilders this time. No problem. Slaying evil and protecting the Tao is the natural talent of us righteous people. These 6 Avilders have committed too many evil deeds, and deserve to be punished by the heavenly court. The other 4 heavenly emperors immediately said, as if they were the righteous ones, and those untrustworthy fellows had nothing to do with them. Kill. The 5 celestial emperors of the heavenly court instantly tore through the void and appeared in front of the 6 great sages in the next second. The 11 of them had already started fighting before the heavenly court and Yuenko's army had even started fighting. Everyone, fight these 5 shameless people to the death. Heaven's equal Gendi shouted. The 6 great sages finally gave up all their unrealistic thoughts and fought with the 5 heavenly emperors. Not long after, the heavenly court's celestial soldiers and generals finally clashed with Yuan Ku's army. Faced with the powerful celestial soldiers and generals, Yuan Ku's army gave up on the idea of running away after learning that they had nowhere to run. Instead, they unleashed a burst of blood energy from their bones and clashed with the celestial soldiers like 2 black and white fists. Although the strength of the 5 celestial emperors of the heavenly court was far greater than that of the 6 great sages, this was, after all, a battle between the strong of the emperor realm. The outcome could not be determined in a short time. On the contrary, the outcome of the battle between the heavenly court and Yuan Ku's army on the ground was about to be determined in about 30 minutes after the battle. One side of the army was made up of elite soldiers and well-equipped generals. Moreover, their overall strength was far superior to the other side. Logically speaking, there was no suspense in the outcome. It should be the powerful heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals. But in reality, it was the elite heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals who were defeated. This might sound unbelievable, but the reason was very simple. Yuan Ku's army had 2 extremely terrifying existences, Liuanian Ling and Guhan. Fleeting times 100 million swords technique was a peerless skill that could deal damage to a large area of effect. It was even more terrifying than Ji Han in terms of area of effect attacks. No matter how strong the elite heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals were, they would still have their mana depleted in an instant when the millions of sword rays in her hands swept across the area. Without magic power, the heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals were just ordinary humans. They were immediately attacked by Yuan Ku, who was glaring at them like a tiger watching its prey, and were instantly smashed into meat paste by his powerful physical attacks. Fleeting Time Lin's 100 million swords technique was like a bug in the game. 20 to 30,000 heavenly soldiers had died because of the 100 million swords technique. No matter how strong the heavenly soldiers' willpower was, they could not help but feel fear when they saw the terrifying 100 million swords technique. No matter how strong the heavenly soldiers' willpower was, they could not help but hesitate in their attacks. If Liuanian Ling was a supreme existence for group attacks, then Guhan was an invincible assassin in one-on-one fights. Guhan had no interest in the low-level heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals, and his Chijian sword was only interested in the experts of the heavenly court who were at least at the nether level. For example, Mighty Miracle God, the tallest of the heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals. Just as he was excitedly swinging his axe to kill the Yuan Ku around him, Guhan rushed in front of Mighty Miracle God like a comet. Scram! In his haste, Mighty Miracle God didn't get a clear look at his opponent, and thought that it was just an ordinary Yuan Ku. He instinctively swung his axe, wanting to send Guhan flying. In the end, there was a huge sound of weapons clashing, and Mighty Miracle God's axe was sent flying by Guhan. Only now did Mighty Miracle God realize that his opponent was the terrifying existence that had just defeated Ou Gen. To be honest, Mighty Miracle God really wanted to escape, but if he did so, pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li would definitely come after him and punish him for fleeing in the face of battle. Thus, Mighty Miracle God planned to exchange a few blows with Guhan and escape after his body was injured. That way, even pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li wouldn't be able to find trouble with him. As for whether or not he could withstand Guhan's attacks, Mighty Miracle God was quite confident. Although he was only a nether-tier Yuan Ku, Mighty Miracle God also cultivated his physical body, and the strength of his physical body wasn't much different from that of a universe-tier Yuan Ku. According to Mighty Miracle God's conservative estimate, he could at least withstand more than 100 blows from Guhan. Unfortunately, while his thoughts were beautiful, reality was cruel. Mighty Miracle God could only withstand 3 blows from Guhan. In the first blow, Guhan attacked Mighty Miracle God's neck, causing him to instinctively lower his head. In the second blow, Guhan shaved off Mighty Miracle God's braid, turning him into a pitiful little bald man. In the third blow, Guhan lightly tapped a certain spot on Mighty Miracle God's scalp. After that, Ji-Yuhan directly flew away, abandoning the Mighty Miracle God and leaving. What's the meaning of this? Is he letting me off because he thinks I'm cute? Guhan's departure baffled Mighty Miracle God. Just as he was feeling puzzled, he suddenly felt a huge suction force sucking him into the air. Who is it? Who's using the Wild Wind Immortal spell? Mighty Miracle God thought that someone was using the Wild Wind Immortal spell, but when he looked up, he was horrified to discover that a dimensional vortex had appeared above his head. And it was this dimensional vortex that was emitting such a huge suction force in an attempt to suck him in. Could it be that I've died? Mighty Miracle God moved his body in horror. When he saw the dimensional vortex appear, Mighty Miracle God instinctively believed that he was dead. However, reality proved that Mighty Miracle God was still fine. His body was neither painful nor itchy, and he could move freely. He didn't look dead at all. Although Mighty Miracle God wasn't dead, it was impossible for him to live in this world. The power of the dimensional vortex wasn't something Mighty Miracle God could resist. After struggling for a while, Mighty Miracle God was finally sucked back by the dimensional vortex. Until the moment Mighty Miracle God left, he still couldn't figure out if he was dead or alive. Chidian, oh, Chidian, it's finally time to show your might. Seeing the Mighty Miracle God being sucked into the dimensional vortex, Ji-Yuhan gently caressed Chidian's blade. Chidian's terrifying sword mark contract, which could send Yuenko back to the dimensional vortex, was finally fully displayed at this moment. Without using the Chidian sword, even with Guhan's strength, it would take him 50 to 60 moves to kill a Nether Yuan Ku and more than a minute. And there were hundreds of Nether Yuan Ku in the heavenly courts. It would take 7 to 8 hours to finish them all off. By then, the Yuan Ku alliance would have long collapsed. However, with the Chidian sword's ability, as long as Guhan could see the other party's dimensional node, he could send them back to the dimensional vortex within 3 moves. The entire process took less than 5 seconds. In a minute, Guhan eliminated 12 Nether Yuan Ku. He was simply the most terrifying killing machine. What's going on? Why is it like this? Soon, all the great immortals in the heavenly courts discovered a frightening fact. The Nether and Meteor Yuan Ku were dying quickly. Almost every 5 seconds, a dimensional vortex would appear and suck in the heavenly courts Nether Yuan Ku and above. And this wasn't the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that these Yuan Ku that were sucked in weren't dead, but alive. They could still scream in panic and struggle. They were clearly alive, but these living fellows were actually directly sucked in by the dimensional vortex. This completely shattered the common sense of all Yuan Ku. In fact, it wasn't just the heavenly court's Yuan Ku. Even the Yuan Ku Alliance's Yuan Ku Alliance stared dumbfoundedly at everything in front of them. They were also Yuan Ku. If the dimensional vortex had the same effect on them, if that assassin flying crazily in the sky aimed his long sword at them, they would probably be the ones being sucked into the dimensional vortex. Everyone, don't panic. Brother Military Governor is our friend. He won't attack us. Lu Ban immediately shouted. With Brother Military Governor helping us take care of those troublesome Heaven Immortals and Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals, we can be fearless. For our dead comrades. Everyone, kill. Victory will be ours. Everyone, kill. Long live. Hearing Lu Ban's words of encouragement, the Yuan bandit army instantly exploded with a shocking momentum, and with a cry of victory, they launched a counterattack against these celestial soldiers and generals. Because of the loss of the Nether level and the Meteor level Yuan bandit army, which were the backbone of the army, the morale of the Heavenly Court's army began to decline rapidly. The situation began to turn, and they quickly fell into a disadvantageous position. On the other hand, Guhan's hunt continued. But at this time, all the nether Yuan Ku had been sucked into the dimensional vortex. Guhan's target was the universe and Eon Yuan Ku, which were the Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals. Chapter 1335. Your Majesty, this is bad. On the battlefield of the 11 Desolation level Yuan Ku, the Heavenly Court had gained an absolute advantage. Under the leadership of the Jade Emperor, the Heavenly Court's 4 Celestial Emperors forced the 6 Great Sages to retreat, forcing the 6 Great Sages to band together to protect themselves. However, this was the result that the Heavenly Court wanted. As long as the opponents banded together, the Heavenly Court could get rid of them once and for all. Just as the battle was progressing according to the Jade Emperor's plan, Red Emperor South Pole Immortal Wang suddenly warned the Jade Emperor. What's wrong? The battle is going well. These 6 guys are much weaker than I thought, the Jade Emperor said proudly. At this time, because the 6 Great Sages had just been resurrected, their strength was extremely damaged. The battle situation was far simpler than the Jade Emperor had imagined. The Jade Emperor even felt that he could suppress the 5 Great Sages with his own strength. As such, the result of the battle was quite clear. The Heavenly Court would win, and the Yuan Ku Alliance army would lose. Just as the Jade Emperor was immersed in his great cause, South Pole Immortal Wang's warning seemed a little untimely. The Jade Emperor frowned when he heard it. Your Majesty, pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li just reported to me that our army is about to collapse. South Pole Immortal Wang said anxiously. What? The Jade Emperor panicked and was hit by Wu Zetian's dragon might. The protective immortal light on the surface of his body wavered. Sky Immortal. Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal. Our strength and numbers are far greater than those trash. How can our army be defeated? The Jade Emperor instinctively lowered his head after he finished speaking. This was the first time he observed the situation of his army since the battle began. However, the moment he saw it, his hair stood on end. At this moment, the originally aggressive Heavenly Court army no longer had their earth-shaking momentum. Instead, they were trembling like a group of sheep waiting to be slaughtered. The reason for this was that the Nether and Universe-level Yuan Ku Alliance army were unscrupulously harvesting the lives of the ordinary soldiers of the Heavenly Court. Seeing their comrades in arms being mowed down like grass, no matter how strict these soldiers and generals were in training and how fearless they were, they instinctively felt a strong sense of fear. Where are our Sky Immortals? Where are our perfected Golden Immortals? Where did they go? Jade Emperor roared angrily. In his hasty glance just now, he did not see any Celestial Immortal or Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal appear to stop the enemy. It was as if there were no Celestial Immortals or Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals on his side. No wonder the army of Heavenly Court, which had an absolute advantage, was on the verge of collapse. I also don't know. I also suddenly received Li Jing's report, the South Pole Immortal Wang said. Bastard. Where was Li Jing? He was the pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li of the Heavenly Court. Where was he now? Come out and block these damned Yuan Ku for me, the Jade Emperor said through gritted teeth. At the same time, his sharp eyes began to search for pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li amidst the Heavenly Court's army, but to his shock, he couldn't find any trace of him. This guy. The Jade Emperor clenched his teeth in exasperation, then took out the investiture of the gods and began to search for pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li's position through the true spirit of the investiture of the gods. In the end, he actually found pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li amidst a group of soldiers. But what the Jade Emperor never expected was that the mighty Ling Heavenly King Li, who liked to wear dazzling armor, wear a crown that seemed to want to fly to the heavens, and constantly drag his exquisite pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li around, was now dressed like a soldier. He was hiding amongst a large group of soldiers, maintaining the exact same posture as them. No wonder the Jade Emperor couldn't find pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li. He never would have thought that pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li would be hiding amongst the soldiers. Li Jing, what are you doing? Come out and command the army. Otherwise, I'll destroy the true spirit in your investiture of the gods. Seeing this, the Jade Emperor could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. He roared at Li Jing, who was hiding amongst the soldiers. "Oh no, I knew I shouldn't have been so nosy as to report this." Hearing the Jade Emperor's order, not only did pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li not obediently come out and command the army, he even let out a ghostly cry of complaint. Then, he charged out of the army and started running away from the battlefield. "This bastard, I'm going to kill him." Seeing pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li's actions, the Jade Emperor was so angry that he stomped his feet. He decided to leave the battlefield to the other 4 Sky Emperors and leave the battlefield himself. He raised his investiture of the gods, planning to directly destroy pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li's true spirit. But before the Jade Emperor could do anything, a figure appeared like a ghost behind the fleeing pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li. "I'll fight you to the death." Seeing this, pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li finally stopped running. Instead, he took out his exquisite pagoda-bearing Heavenly King and prepared to fight to the death against this ghost. Unfortunately, pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li had clearly overthought things. Before he could even use his exquisite pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li, he was sent flying by the opponent's long sword. Then, the long sword stabbed him a few times before he swaggered off. "That's strange. Why did the military governor leave?" The Jade Emperor immediately recognized this ghostly figure. It was the man who had just defeated Ou General. Even the immortal sword tier Ou Gen was no match for this man. The Sky Immortal pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li was naturally no match for the military governor. Pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li was bound to lose. But what the Jade Emperor didn't understand was that the military governor could have killed pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li with just a few more strikes. Why did he stop after just a few strikes? Could it be that the two of them had made some sort of secret deal? Had the military governor deliberately let pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li go? The Jade Emperor's confusion didn't last long. In the next second, he understood why Guhan had left. A dimensional vortex quickly appeared beside pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li. Although pagoda-bearing Heavenly King Li struggled with all his might, he couldn't escape the suction of the dimensional vortex. In the end, he screamed as he was sucked into the dimensional vortex, disappearing without a trace. "This guy, he can actually open a dimensional vortex while we're still alive," the Jade Emperor exclaimed. Then, another expert hidden in the crowd of heavenly soldiers was revealed. This time, it was a Da Luo Golden Immortal expert. Moreover, it was the leader of the Thunder Tribe, the famous Grand Preceptor Wenzhong. This was a guy that even the Jade Emperor didn't like. Although this Grand Preceptor Wenzhong was his subordinate, she had the backing of the sect leader of Tongtian. Normally, she would look down on the Jade Emperor. Although this Grand Preceptor Wenzhong obeyed the Jade Emperor's orders, that was all. Other times, Grand Preceptor Wenzhong didn't even care about the Jade Emperor. Although the Jade Emperor was very vexed about this, because of the sect leader of Tongtian, the Jade Emperor could only silently endure it. As long as this Grand Preceptor Wenzhong still obeyed his imperial edict, it was enough. This was the Jade Emperor's bottom line. However, this Grand Preceptor Wenzhong, who didn't even care about the Jade Emperor in the past, was now being chased by the military governor like a stray dog. This Grand Preceptor Wenzhong didn't even have the courage to fight back. He just kept running, deeply afraid that Guhan's sword would stab him. Unfortunately, such an escape was useless. In the end, Grand Preceptor Wenzhong was still caught by Guhan. After a minute of entanglement, Grand Preceptor Wenzhong's defense was finally broken by Guhan. His armpits were exposed, and then Guhan stabbed him with his sword. In this way, the Jade Emperor could only watch as a Da Luo Golden Immortal expert was sent into the dimensional vortex by the military governor in just 1 minute. He didn't even have the strength to resist. "Xiaohao, go kill that military governor." Judging from his voice, the Jade Emperor was about to go crazy. He finally understood why his army was defeated. When all the Celestial Immortals and Da Luo Golden Immortals were hiding in the small army because they were afraid of the opponent's dimensional vortex and didn't dare to reveal their true identities, how could his army not be defeated? However, the Jade Emperor's mind was still very clear. The urgent matter at hand was to find someone to end this troublesome military governor. He had to kill him directly with the power of a Celestial Emperor. Even if he couldn't kill him in a short time, He had to entangle him so that his Da Luo golden immortals could jump out and change the situation of the whole battlefield. If possible, the Jade Emperor actually wanted to personally kill this military governor. It was a pity that there were now 6 great sages here. If the Jade Emperor left, the remaining 4 celestial emperors who were responsible for the siege were likely to be seriously injured or killed by the opponents. This was absolutely unacceptable to the Jade Emperor. However, Xiaohao was 2 realms higher than this military governor. It shouldn't be a problem to deal with him. Yes. Xiaohao didn't hesitate. He immediately accepted the order and left. Remember, this guy's swordsmanship is very strange. You'd better not let his sword touch your body. Otherwise, you may end up like Wen Zhong just now. The Jade Emperor warned him one last time. Go to hell. The Jade Emperor's warning was very important, but Qing Emperor Xiaohao didn't care about the military governor at all. Although the military governor's attack was indeed very strange, Qing Emperor Xiaohao was extremely confident. After all, he was 2 realms higher than his opponent. How could he be defeated by his opponent? He could completely crush his opponent with his powerful innate power of rules. Chapter 1336. Bo Yikao. Go and help him now. The Jade Emperor gritted his teeth and decided to send one of the 5 heavenly emperors to help Xiaohao. This would put the Jade Emperor under great pressure, but without the help of Bo Yikao and Xiaohao, the 6 great sages would immediately pull themselves together and even gain a slight advantage. My magic treasure, why can't I use it? In contrast, the Heavenly Court's army found that all their attributes had dropped by about 3 times, and even their fleeing speed was no exception. Heavens! My demon power has increased by 3 times. What's wrong with my feet? They feel as heavy as lead. You set a trap. Seeing that the 6 great sages didn't look too surprised, the Jade Emperor came to a realization. The green light emitted from his body and the red light from the opponents were all traps set by the opponents, and he had foolishly fallen into their trap. Good. Guhan didn't put on any pretense and directly let Liuonian Ling block Xiaohao for him. He continued to frantically search for the Celestial Immortals and Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals hidden in Yuan Ku's army, and then sent them back to the dimensional whirlpool one by one. When the Jade Emperor gave this order, the Heavenly Court's army, which was already in a precarious situation, completely collapsed. Seeing countless of their comrades die under the unbridled attacks of the Nether and Universe-level bandits, and the original 100,000 celestial soldiers and generals were reduced to less than 40,000. The remaining 40,000 celestial soldiers and generals finally couldn't take it anymore. After a wave of terrified screams, they immediately threw down their weapons and began to scatter and flee. Yes, we are indeed going to die here. The Jade Emperor looked up at the sky and sighed. But before we die, at least let us know where our books are. Where did this damned red and green light come from? Your Majesty. Hearing this, the expressions of the other 3 heavenly emperors became extremely frightened. They had come with the relaxed mentality of teasing their prey. They never thought that the final result would be like this. Were they going to die in this inexplicable place? Brothers, kill. Take this opportunity to kill all the heavenly soldiers and generals. A cry rang out from the Yuan Bandit Alliance's army, whose stats had been tripled out of thin air, and their aura soared to the extreme as they charged at the unfortunate celestial soldiers and generals. Because their stats had been tripled, even escaping was an extravagant hope for these celestial soldiers and generals. All they could do was put up a brief resistance before they were cut down as easily as if they were chopping vegetables. Cao Yu. The Jade Emperor thought for a while and nodded. I've heard of this name. Is it that Cao Yu who did it all in one go? Sir, it's ready to be activated. Cao Yarrow nodded. Next, his figure floated up into the sky and a voice as massive as Mount Tai appeared behind him. It was so loud that it seemed as though the entire world could hear it. As Cao Yarrow's words, which were famous throughout Huaxia and the world, rang out, the bodies of both sides lit up with red and green lights. But there was no other way now. The Jade Emperor could only grit his teeth and persevere. He had to get rid of that damned Guhan as soon as possible. Otherwise, even if he won the final victory, the Heavenly Court would only be left with a few commanders without an army after killing 6 great sages. How could the celestial emperors, whose strength had been tripled, be a match for the 6 great sages who had tripled in strength? With this attack, all 4 celestial emperors suffered heavy injuries. Although such injuries were not enough to kill the 4 celestial emperors, it was easy enough to put them in an absolutely disadvantageous position. The heavenly court's allied forces on the ground were already in such a miserable state, but the 4 sky emperors in the sky weren't much better off. Like their own troops, their strength had dropped by 3 times in an instant, while their opponent's strength had skyrocketed by 3 times. There was now a gap of 6 times between them, and this was undoubtedly a fatal change for the 4 sky emperors. From the first second that their strength changed, the 6 great saints abruptly unleashed their attacks to the limit, and directly killed the 4 sky emperors who appeared to be in a daze because of the green light that covered their bodies. No. Unexpectedly, Wu Zetian refused Yamata no Orochi's suggestion neatly. She said, "I've been acting with the 5 of them for so long and set up such a good trap. If I don't tell them the whole story, I won't be able to sleep at night." However, Guhan also knew that although Liuyan Ling was indeed strong, she was no match for Qing Emperor Xiaohao. The time that Liuyan Ling could buy for him was probably not much. Thinking of this, Guhan's attacks became more and more fierce. More fairy immortals and Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals were sent back into the dimensional vortex by Guhan. After Wu Zetian snorted coldly, she asked the Jade Emperor, "Hao Tian, have you heard of the name Cao Yang?" "Xiaohao, what are you doing? Kill that Guhan for me." The Jade Emperor, who had been paying attention to the situation on the ground, scolded his younger brother Xiaohao angrily. "This isn't a trap. It's you who didn't keep your word. You reap what you sow. We're just playing along with you to put on a show." Ha 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 ha. Qi Tian Jendi laughed complacently, his eyes full of ridicule. "No. You've not lost. You're going to die here." Wu Zetian let out a long laugh. The golden bells of heaven and earth in her hands made a series of killing sounds. "Hao Tian, let's end our 800-year feud here." However, before the flame could touch Guhan, it was blocked by thousands of sword lights. In the end, the flame and the sword lights perished together and disappeared in the air. "Yes, it's that Cao Yang." Wu Zetian nodded. Her face was full of excitement and pride. Obviously, she was immersed in the pleasure of explaining the ins and outs of the matter. Although Cao Yang is only a Dragon Realm Yuan Ku, his skill can even make you, a celestial emperor, fall for it. How ridiculous! How ridiculous! There's no need to talk nonsense with him. Let's just kill him. Yamata no Orochi, who had the most violent temper, said. At the same time, he also made a very correct suggestion. Whether it was the protagonist or the antagonist, explaining the cause and effect of the other party's death was a very stupid thing to do. The coalition army of Yuan dynasty was 3 times stronger than the army of Yuan dynasty, and the celestial soldiers and generals were 3 times weaker. The difference between the two was 6 times, which was a gap that could not be overcome with courage and morale. The remaining 40,000 heavenly soldiers were quickly caught up by the Yuan Ku's army. These soldiers were easily killed by their opponents like scarecrows. The casualties of the Yuan Ku's army were almost 0. My strength has increased. Courage is the key to fighting. The first spurt of energy will weaken, and the third will be exhausted. When the enemy is exhausted, I am full. When a great country is unfathomable, there is always fear. When I see their ruts in chaos and their flags in defeat, I will chase them. The Jade Emperor's idea was very correct. Getting rid of Guhan right now was indeed the best way. Unfortunately, the Jade Emperor's decision was a little too late. If the Jade Emperor had ordered the Purple Emperor Bo Ikao to kill Guhan a minute earlier, it would have been fine. But in reality, he was a minute too late. This time, I've lost. If it was in the past, the Jade Emperor would have definitely sent his army to tear the other party to shreds when he saw the other party's mocking expression. But now, the Jade Emperor had already lost the interest. He seemed to have accepted his fate. Instead, he calmly admitted defeat. The bodies of the Yuan Ku's army lit up with a scarlet light, while the bodies of the Heavenly Court's army lit up with a dark green light. Even Guhan, Liuyan Ling, and the 11 desolation level experts in the sky were no exception. Their bodies lit up with the colors that represented their respective factions. But in reality, Liuyan Ling was as tough as a piece of sticky candy. She firmly entangled Xiaohao, even if she had to use her own body to block Xiaohao's flames. She wanted to stop Xiaohao in the sky. Left with no other choice, Xiaohao could only kill Liuyan Ling before he could chase after Gu Han. In their state of escape, the Heavenly Court's army's footsteps were extremely disorderly. The flags in their hands were also thrown to the ground like trash. For the sake of the other escapees, they had truly been defeated. My immortal power. Why is there only a third of my immortal power left? Me too. I feel like my strength has tripled. I feel like I can kill everyone now. The Yuan Ku's army was the first to speak excitedly. Almost all of the soldiers found that their strength had tripled. This was an all-around increase, including their demon power, strength, vision, and so on. It was equivalent to tripling all their attributes. We've finally been defeated. At the same time, in the core of the Yuan Ku's army, Lu Ban's defeated Heavenly Court's army finally heaved a sigh of relief. He sighed, then said to Cao Yu beside him, "Can you use your skill now? Gu Han, leave this opponent to me. Continue to kill those Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals." Fleeting Time Lin appeared at the crucial moment and blocked Xiaohao's attack for Ji Yu Han. Die. Xiaohao was like a large bird that flew towards the cold on the battlefield. At the same time, he shot out an extremely fierce orange flame from his mouth. Wherever the flame passed, even the air would start to burn. The power of the flame was truly terrifying. Big brother. This Liuyan clan's opponent is too difficult. She doesn't care about her life at all. Give me 5 more minutes, and I'll be able to kill this remnant of the Liuyan clan in 5 minutes. Xiaohao responded irritably but helplessly. By now, his battle with Liuyan Ling had already lasted for about 10 minutes. Although Liuyan Ling's strength was far from his own, Xiaohao should have been able to shake her off very quickly. However, the Jade Emperor couldn't understand how he had fallen into the enemy's trap. Or rather, what the hell was the enemy's trap? He didn't even know what was going on before he fell into such a panic. Chapter 1337. Cao Yu. Anyone who went to junior high school should know this person and his famous saying, "The first spurt of energy will weaken, and the third will be exhausted." This Cao Yu. Is this the effect of his skill? Let this emperor guess. The Jade Emperor said while panting, the effect of his skill is to reduce the enemy's strength by 3 times, and increase his own strength by 3 times. In total, it's a total of 9 times. Am I right? Do I still need you to guess? Could it be that our Jade Emperor still can't feel his own strength weakening? Wu Zetian sneered, her face filled with an insolent smile. Mocking the Jade Emperor to her heart's content was Wu Zetian's dream. She had been waiting for this day for 800 years. Of course I don't need to guess. I just didn't expect that a puny Cao Yu would actually be a prehistoric Yuan Ku, causing us to fall into such a trap, the Jade Emperor said in annoyance. This was also the biggest doubt in his heart. He knew about Cao Yu's story. He had only commanded a small battle with no more than 30,000 people. Although he had left the famous saying in history, he did not have a high reputation. If such a guy became a Yuan Ku, he would at most be a dragon Yuan Ku. How could he become a prehistoric Yuan Ku? Ha ha ha. Hao Tian, I didn't expect you to deceive others and deceive yourself. Who told you that Mr. Cao Yu was a prehistoric Yuan Ku? How could that Cao Yu be a prehistoric Yuan Ku? Wu Zetian laughed even more exaggeratedly. To tell you the truth, Mr. Cao Yu is only a tiger Yuan Ku. What? That's impossible. How could he be a tiger-level Yuan bandit? The Jade Emperor howled in disbelief. I'm a dignified celestial emperor, a prehistoric expert, an existence that can suppress the entire world. How could a mere tiger-level bandit affect me? The Jade Emperor's disbelief wasn't fake. He was truly shocked by the news. On one side was the weakest tiger-class Yuan Ku, who was equivalent to an ancient sword tier. On the other side was the incomparably powerful prehistoric tier Yuan Ku. Even if hundreds of thousands of tiger-class Yuan Ku attacked the Jade Emperor at the same time, the Jade Emperor would not be harmed at all, and their skills would be directly nullified by the huge difference in realm between the two. A Tiger-class Yuan Ku skill would not be able to affect a prehistoric tier Yuan Ku. Therefore, the Jade Emperor did not believe that he would be affected by a Tiger-grade Yuan Ku skill. Hao Tian, you think you're so knowledgeable and know everything in the world. Don't you know that there are military skills in the world? Wu Zetian coldly laughed. Military skills. The Jade Emperor was stunned, but he immediately reacted. This military influence skill referred to the skill that could affect two different armies. This skill was effective against the military strength of both sides. As long as the military strength of both sides was in a relatively stable state, this skill would be effective and would not be affected by the strength of the individual. I see. The Jade Emperor smiled bitterly and nodded. He finally understood why a puny Tiger-class Yuan Ku skill could be effective against him. Although the Heavenly Court's army looked much stronger than Yuan Ku's army, both sides were actually evenly matched in terms of high-level combat power. Moreover, there was an extra 6 great sages. When added to the army, the strength of both sides was barely maintained at a state of equilibrium. That was why Cao Yu's military skill could be effective. To activate the military skill, one needs to meet a rather harsh condition. Is the condition for Cao Yu's military skill to be activated by us losing 3 battles? The Jade Emperor was not stupid. In fact, he was a little puzzled at the beginning. Why did the 6 great sages insist on fighting him 3 times? However, he quickly threw these doubts to the back of his mind. Now that he thought about it, it was probably a trap that they had dug for him. That's right. In order to activate Cao Yu's military skill, 2 conditions must be met. Wu Zetian raised 2 fingers and said, first, there will be 3 duels between the generals of the 2 armies, and one side must win all of them. Second, after the 2 armies start fighting, one army must defeat the enemy's main force within an hour. Moreover, it must be an absolute defeat. Only when these 2 conditions are met can Cao Yu's military skill be activated. Otherwise, it will be useless. I understand. The Jade Emperor nodded emotionally. The first spurt of energy, the second decline, and the third exhaustion. Also, I see their ruts in chaos, and their flags in defeat, so I expel them. I remember these 2 sentences, but I never thought that I would be defeated by them. A man's battle requires courage. The first spurt of energy, the second decline, and the third exhaustion. When the enemy is exhausted, I am full, so I subdue them. A great country is unpredictable, and there is fear in it. I see their ruts in chaos, and their flags in defeat, so I expel them. This was a rather famous speech by Cao Yu in the history books. It also contained his life's military principles, as well as the triggering conditions for his army force skill. Cao Yu's army force skill could only be triggered when he defeated his opponent 3 times in a row and utterly crushed his opponent. So all of your initial show of weakness was just an act for me. Whether it was asking for allegiance or the position of Celestial Emperor, it was all to cover up your true motive for initiating the battle. No wonder you agreed to my request after winning 2 battles in a row and continued with the 3rd battle. I didn't expect this to be your true motive. This is in line with your intentions. Right. The Jade Emperor said bitterly. That's right. Hao Tian. You're right. You're an idiot. To think that you still dare to sit on the position of Celestial Emperor. You're a complete idiot for jumping into the trap we've set for you. There's no one more idiotic than you in this world. Wu Zetian mocked wantonly, and the Jade Emperor's expression turned as ugly as dried soy sauce. Fine, I was careless and fell into the trap of you sinister and vicious villains. You despicable villains. Shameless. At this moment, the Jade Emperor seemed to have no other way to deal with the situation other than calling them shameless. Hao Tian, you can say other things, but you can't call us despicable people. You can't call us shameless either, because you're the most shameless one. When Heaven's equal Jendi heard the Jade Emperor's insults, he walked out and scolded sternly, if you, Hao Tian, had followed the rules and admitted defeat after we won 2 battles, sending us to the position of Celestial Emperor, we wouldn't have had a reason to proceed with the 3rd battle. Hao Tian, the reason why you lost was not because of the trap we set for you, but because you're a shameless bastard. You're the one who trampled on the promise and contract we made. You tore up your integrity, and your mind is filled with violence and treachery. If you had kept even a little bit of your promise, Cao Yu's military force would not have been triggered. The one who really destroyed the Heavenly Court's army was not us, but you. The moment you chose to abandon your promise, you were destined to fail. Heaven's equal Gendi's words were like a sharp knife stabbing into the Jade Emperor's heart. Although the Jade Emperor wanted to refute Heaven's equal Gendi's words, he knew very well that what Heaven's equal Gendi said was the truth. If he kept his promise and allowed the 6 great sages to ascend to the position of Celestial Emperor after Yuan Ku won 2 battles, then Cao Yu's military force would lose all conditions to trigger. The 6 great sages were taking a gamble. They bet that he would break his promise and walk into their trap. In the end, they won the gamble. He really became the fool and stepped into the trap that they had set in advance. Big brother, save me. Just as the Jade Emperor thought of this, a door suddenly opened in the void beside him. Qing Emperor Xiaohao, who was covered in blood, struggled to return to his brother's side. His body had already been pierced over 100 times, and golden blood was constantly flowing out of the wounds. His entire person had become extremely weak. Xiaohao, how did you become like this? There isn't even a single prehistoric realm expert down there. Even if your strength has been reduced by 3 times, how did you end up like this by those trash? Seeing Qing Emperor Xiaohao on the verge of death, the Great Emperor said angrily and painfully, "It's gone. Big brother, it's all gone." Qing Emperor Xiaohao spat out a mouthful of golden blood and said in a sobbing voice, "Our 100,000 heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals are all gone. They were all killed. I was besieged by all the Yuan Ku on the ground. That military governor, that Liuanian Ling, and that Artoria. Their strength has been increased by 3 times. I'm really no match for them." At this point, Xiaohao spat out several mouthfuls of blood. With Xiaohao's return, the Yuan Ku on the ground burst into cheers, celebrating their victory. Military Governor, Lu Ban, Liuanian Ling, and Artoria all flew to the battlefield in the sky and surrounded the 5 celestial emperors of the Heavenly Court. At this moment, there were only 5 people left on the battlefield. "Your Majesty, we can't delay any longer. Let's escape." Seeing that the situation was extremely bad, Scarlet Emperor South Pole Immortal Wang felt helpless. In the end, he tried to persuade the Jade Emperor, "Your Majesty, let's immediately escape in different directions. How many of us can escape counts. As long as we can preserve the Heavenly Court's inheritance, we haven't lost." South Pole Immortal Wang was right. They had indeed reached the point where they could escape as many as they could. In a situation where their strength had been reduced by 3 times, it was impossible for all 5 of them to escape. They could only escape in different directions through the void. This way, the 6 great sages would have to split into 3 teams to chase after them. At least 2 celestial emperors would survive. Heavenly Court! To think that he was already in such a miserable state. Chapter 1338. No. We can't escape. So what if 2 or 3 of us can escape? Are we going to be like these trash 800 years ago, living like rats in the dark underground for 800 years? No. Absolutely not. The Jade Emperor stood up and said firmly, "If we escape, the foundation of our Heavenly Court for 100 years will be completely over, and we haven't lost yet." What? The Jade Emperor's words stunned all the surrounding sky sovereigns. The gap in strength had been forcibly widened by 9 times. Defeat was already inevitable. How could there still be any possibility of victory? Was this Jade Emperor's brain short-circuited? "I still have this." The Jade Emperor sneered and took out a long sword from the void. Seeing this long sword, the 6 great sages did not have any reaction, but the other 4 celestial emperors' expressions changed. Among them, Celestial Emperor Gaochen could not help but shout the name of this sword, Immortal Trapping Sword. Immortal Trapping Sword. The moment he saw this sword, Guhan also recognized it. It was the last lost immortal trapping sword of the 4 immortal slaying swords, and also the one that Guhan was missing. If he obtained this immortal trapping sword, then Guhan could nominally complete the 4 immortal slaying swords. However, this was just a copy of a game after all. This immortal trapping sword was just a pile of data. This gave Guhan a guess. Could it be that in reality, the immortal trapping sword was in the hands of the Jade Emperor of the Heavenly Court? Thinking of this, Guhan felt a headache. In the copy, he could use the power of the 6 great sages to force the Jade Emperor to the point where he could be killed at any time. However, in reality, the power of the Heavenly Court was still extremely strong. It was impossible for him to get the immortal trapping sword from the Jade Emperor alone. Back to the main topic, when the other 4 celestial emperors saw the Jade Emperor take out the immortal trapping sword, they understood what the Jade Emperor wanted to do. Among them, Qing Emperor Xiaohao hugged his big brother's thigh and persuaded, "Big brother, you can't. If you do this, your future will be over. You will never be able to reach the Sage Realm. Let me go." The Jade Emperor kicked Qing Emperor Xiaohao away and said sternly, "I'm the one who harmed you. If I don't make this decision today, I will be the greatest sinner of the Heavenly Court. Moreover, these 6 idiots will accompany me in death. I am satisfied. Not good. Quickly kill them." No matter how stupid the 6 great sages were, they could tell that the Jade Emperor was brewing some sort of killing move. Although they didn't know if this killing move had the power to reverse the situation, the 6 great sages didn't dare to take such a risk. Therefore, they immediately pounced on the Jade Emperor. "Help His Majesty block it." The 4 celestial emperors knew that it was time to decide the outcome of the battle. They immediately surrounded the Jade Emperor and used their own bodies to block the attacks of the 6 great sages. Although their strength was 9 times weaker than the Jade Emperor's, they were still experts of the Great Desolate Era. It was not a problem for them to delay for a minute or two. But for the Jade Emperor, 10 seconds was enough. "Fellow Daoist, have you really made up your mind to kill me?" The moment the Jade Emperor made up his mind, a man who looked exactly like the Jade Emperor walked out of the Jade Emperor's body. However, he wore a Taoist robe and had a sage-like demeanor. He didn't have the domineering aura of the Jade Emperor at all. He seemed to be just a simple cultivator. He asked the Jade Emperor with a smile, "That's right. I must kill you today. Otherwise, both you and I will die." The Jade Emperor said, "Tao follows the laws of nature. Predestined space destruction. Since you have made up your mind, then kill me." The Taoist nodded and said in a relaxed and joyful manner. It was as if killing him was a very small and insignificant matter. However, when it was time to make his move, the Jade Emperor hesitated. If he killed the Jade Emperor, he would say goodbye to his supreme dream forever. This would undoubtedly destroy his future. Just as the Jade Emperor hesitated again, a burst of miserable screams came from the mouth of his younger brother, Xiaohao. As the most seriously injured and the weakest of the 5 heaven emperors, Emperor Qing Xiaohao naturally became the breakthrough point chosen by the 6 great sages. 3 great sages attacked Xiaohao at the same time, hoping to kill him as quickly as possible. In this way, the entire defensive circle would be destroyed. The Jade Emperor would also face the attacks of the 6 great sages. "I will grind your bones and scatter your ashes." Seeing this scene, the Jade Emperor finally stopped hesitating. He closed his eyes and the immortal thread sword in his hand pierced the head of the Taoist who looked exactly like him. The Tao can be said, but it is not the Tao. The name can be named, but it cannot be named. After the Taoist sang the last line of the song, his whole body turned into nothingness and disappeared in the air. At the same time, at the moment when the Taoist disappeared, 2 Taoists who looked exactly like the Jade Emperor appeared beside the Jade Emperor. After they looked at each other with a bitter smile, they walked into the Jade Emperor's body. In just a few seconds, the Jade Emperor, who seemed a little weak and unbearable, became mighty again, revealing his domineering momentum. Die. Before Yamata no Orokai, who was besieging Xiaohao, could react to what had happened, a sword pierced through one of its heads. Then, its head exploded under the blade of the sword. Yamata no Orokai took a few steps back in pain and wailed in pain. My head is completely destroyed." Yamata no Orokai howled. Under normal circumstances, the 8 heads of Yamata no Orokai could regenerate infinitely. But at this time, Orokai said that its head was completely destroyed. Could it be that the Jade Emperor's sword had completely destroyed one of Orochi's heads? Oh no. There's something wrong with this Hao Tian. Odin, who was attacking Xiaohao with lightning, immediately noticed that the Jade Emperor's situation was not right. As soon as his warning sounded, he became the Jade Emperor's second target. This time, the Jade Emperor did not even use the immortal trapping sword in his hand. He directly slapped Odin's face. Odin was sent flying. Wu Zetian, who was the third to besiege Xiaohao, saw that the situation was not good and retreated alone to avoid becoming the Jade Emperor's third target. As Wu Zetian retreated, the other three great sages also found that the situation had changed dramatically. The three of them, who were afraid of losing their lives, withdrew from the battle circle immediately even though victory was within their grasp. After a short fight between the two sides, they were once again facing each other in pairs. But this time, the Jade Emperor was no longer as weak as before. Instead, he was as majestic as a god of war. The six great sages were almost out of breath due to the pressure of his imposing manner. Hao Tian, what had happened to him? Did Cao Yu's military force lose its effect? Ping Tian Jendi said in disbelief. No, the other celestial emperors still have green light on their bodies, and they are still weak. Only Hao Tian's condition isn't right. What did he do? Odin, whose left cheek was swollen with a palm mark, said. Very good. Very good. You actually forced me to use a peerless weapon to kill my true self. Very good. You are all very good. Today, I will use your lives as a sacrifice to my true self. The Jade Emperor's face did not show joy or sorrow, but his monstrous killing intent could not be concealed no matter what. True self. 3 corpses. Liuanian Ling seemed to understand something, and covered her mouth in surprise. What true self? What 3 corpses? Tell us clearly. The 6 great sages noticed that Liuanian Ling seemed to know something, and immediately asked impatiently. This is a method passed down in the heavenly court to surpass the prehistoric level. Liuanian Ling replied, legend has it that as long as the prehistoric level Yuan Ku of the heavenly court can use his own understanding of Tao to cut off his 3 corpses, that is, good, evil, and true self, these 3 mysterious things, he can surpass the realm of rules and reach the realm of Tao of heaven. And Tao of heaven can allow the prehistoric level experts to have power that surpasses the prehistoric level. The good and evil corpses are easy to cut off, but the true self is the most difficult of the 3 corpses. If a prehistoric level expert can cut off his true self, it means that the door to becoming a sage has been opened to him. What? Liuanian Ling's words made everyone's expression change. Wu Zetian, who was the most arrogant just now, became extremely frightened and said, I just saw Hao Tian kill a guy who looks exactly like him. Is that his true self? Has this Hao Tian already surpassed the prehistoric level? Hearing what Wu Zetian said, the 6 great sages all took a step back. Beyond the level of great desolation, this was not an existence that they could provoke. No. Cutting off the 3 corpses is not like what it means. You have to cut off these 3 thoughts. On the contrary, you have to completely separate these 3 thoughts from your own divine sense. From then on, these 3 corpses will become independent but controlled by the deity. You can't just cut them off for anything. On the contrary, if Hao Tian kills his true self directly, it will completely cut off his path of advancement. He can no longer become a sage by cutting off the 3 corpses. He will forever stay at the prehistoric level and completely lose the possibility of advancement. Liuanian Ling said with certainty. I didn't expect that the Liuanian clan actually has the method of cutting off the 3 corpses to become a sage, and you know it in such detail. Liuanian Ling's words also reached the Jade Emperor's ears. The Jade Emperor looked at Liuanian Ling in surprise. He could not understand why the Liuanian clan, which was a human, knew his cultivation method so well. However, the Jade Emperor was too lazy to think so much now. He just said lightly, yes, as you said, I have cut off my path of transcending the prehistoric level, but you forced me to do so. Only by cutting off my true self can I get rid of the shackles of this military force skill. At the same time, I will take back the good and evil corpses that I have killed. Now, my power is no longer reduced by 3 times. After merging with the good and evil corpses, my power has increased by 3 times. You Avilders, today, you will be buried with me for the way of heaven. The Jade Emperor's killing intent instantly filled the entire sky. Chapter 1339. Everyone, don't be afraid of him. He's only strengthened by 3 times. We're also strengthened by 3 times. Plus, the weakening effect of the other 4 is still there. We still have the advantage. Wu Zetian encouraged them. The great sages nodded. Everyone, I'll deal with the other 4 alone. You guys attack Hao Tian together, Odin said at the same time. He took over the task of dealing with the other 4 Sky Kings. Actually, Odin was being crafty here. It looked like he was taking on the most important task of dealing with the 4 Sky Kings at the same time. But in reality, dealing with the 4 Sky Kings who had been weakened by 3 times was not a difficult task. On the contrary, the current Hao Tian made Odin's heart tremble. Odin had a feeling that the Jade Emperor's strength was not as simple as having been tripled. The other 5 great sages did not feel anything out of the ordinary with Odin's suggestion. They all charged at the Jade Emperor at the same time. 5 prehistoric level Yuan Ku attacking one opponent at the same time. This was a shocking battle. It was so powerful that it seemed like the entire world was about to be torn apart. You idiots. Do you think that you can win by forcing me to this state? No. You're asking for it. This time, I won't even leave your souls behind. The Jade Emperor swung the captor's sword in his hand. A sword aura so powerful that it seemed like it could cut the entire world in half burst forth. The 5 great sages instinctively used their own strength to defend themselves, but when they collided with the sword aura, the 5 great sages did not even have a shred of resistance. They were all sent flying by the sword aura. The Ottal King was the worst off. His leather cover had been completely cut open, revealing a bloody flesh that no one had seen before. The other 4 great sages also spat out a dozen mouthfuls of blood. Everyone's aura suddenly became dispirited. It was as if the sword aura had ripped out their muscles and bones. Just one sword chi had sent all 5 great sages flying. This did not seem to be a gap in strength, but a gap in realm. The Jade Emperor and the 6 great sages seemed to have entered 2 different realms, a realm that could completely crush the 6 great sages. What the hell is going on? Even if Hao Tian's strength is 3 times stronger, he can't be this strong, Heaven's equal Jendi said in disbelief as he spat out a dozen mouthfuls of blood. This feeling is even more terrifying than when I faced Zetian Jendi all those years ago. There seems to be a kind of power that isolates the vitality of the world in the sword chi just now. This is no longer a simple rule power, the remaining 7 heads of Orokai said in horror at the same time. No. I'm afraid this is no longer the power of the primordial stage. Has Hao Tian surpassed the primordial stage and reached the legendary sage? Pingtian Jendi said in disbelief. Impossible. Hao Tian has already killed his true self. He has already completely severed the possibility of becoming a saint. It is absolutely impossible for him to surpass the great desolate realm, Wu Zetian said as she gritted her teeth. Ha ha ha. Now you have seen my power. This is all thanks to all of you. Because of all of you, I was forced to kill my true self. That's why I have my current strength. I'm already invincible. The Jade Emperor's eyes flashed with the flames of revenge and anger. Although he said that he was invincible, he did not feel happy at all. Instead, he became more and more resentful. What the hell is going on? Why is Hao Tian so powerful? Wu Zetian raised her head and asked Liuanian Ling, who did not dare to join the siege against the Jade Emperor. She could only cooperate with Odin to deal with the other 4 celestial emperors. I don't know. Liuanian Ling's answer was somewhat despairing. However, they could not figure out why the Jade Emperor had become so powerful. The 5 great sages could not resist the Jade Emperor at all. The advantage of the whole battlefield seemed to have returned to the Jade Emperor's hands after a big turn. You don't need to know so much. It's enough for you to die. The Jade Emperor shook the immortal trapping sword in his hand and laughed sinisterly. Hurry up and run. You can split into 6 groups and escape in 6 different directions. If I am distracted, I might miss 1 or 2. Hurry up and run, ha ha ha. The Jade Emperor seemed to be persuading the 6 great sages to escape, but in fact, he just wanted to play a game of cat and mouse. He did not want to kill these 6 guys so easily. These 6 guys had actually forced him to completely cut off his path to becoming a sage. He must toy with these great sages to the extreme, magnifying their fear of death to the extreme. He must let death fill every one of their cells. Only then would he slaughter these 6 guys. In the Jade Emperor's imagination, after understanding the difference in strength between the 2 sides, these 6 great sages, each with their own selfish motives, would escape without hesitation, allowing him to play a happy game of cat and mouse. However, the Jade Emperor did not expect that none of the 6 great sages would escape. They were still firmly united, standing opposite the Jade Emperor, facing this seemingly invincible enemy. Seeing this scene, the Jade Emperor was a little confused. He felt strange and said, "The 6 of you are actually not escaping? Have you changed your temperament, or have you decided to give up the useless escape and self-destruct like 800 years ago?" "No, the 6 of us have not changed our temperament, nor do we plan to self-destruct." Wu Zetian shook her head, and then a trace of an unfathomable expression appeared on her face. "We originally thought that we could kill you with our own strength, but in the end, we still need that person to do it." "Yes. I can't believe that she still needs to do it. How vexing." The rest of the great sages also revealed a wry smile, which made the Jade Emperor have a very bad feeling in his heart. "I can't talk nonsense with them anymore. Kill them first." The Jade Emperor decided to end the nonsense segment. Once again, his whole person was unstoppable, ready to kill the 6 great sages in one blow. "Zetian, I'll leave it to you." The 6 great sages, including Odin, who was still entangled with the 4 celestial emperors, spread out in 4 directions at the same time. At the same time, a sword chi that was not weaker than the Jade Emperor rose from the ground to the sky, forcibly stopping the Jade Emperor. When the 2 sword chi calmed down, the Jade Emperor finally saw the old opponent in front of him clearly. "Yi Qing, you've also resurrected," the Jade Emperor said through gritted teeth. In fact, when the 6 great sages said that they would let another person do it, the Jade Emperor had already guessed that the opponent was likely to be Yi Qing, because in the whole world, only Yi Qing could make him feel a little afraid. "It's not really resurrection. I prefer to call it rebirth," Yi Qing said with a smile. "You've really hidden yourself well, to actually only show up now," the Jade Emperor said, squinting his eyes. "I thought you would rush out at the first moment to fight me. If these 6 great sages didn't think that they already had victory in their hands and wanted me to give the opportunity for revenge to them, of course, I would be the first to rush out," Yi Qing said with a smile. "If you come out with them, as long as you can stop me from killing my true self, then maybe you really have a chance to kill me. Unfortunately, you've been dragged down by these 6 idiots. Now I'm invincible, even you can't be my opponent. Go to hell." As the Jade Emperor's voice fell, countless divine lights filled the sky and strangled Yi Qing. In the face of the Jade Emperor's invincible attack, Yi Qing did not panic. He used his finger as a sword and slashed down at the divine lights that filled the sky. These divine lights were broken in an instant by Yi Qing. So strong. Seeing this scene, the 6 great sages gasped at the same time. Yi Qing did not even use a sword. She directly used her finger to break the Jade Emperor's attack. It should be known that even if they used their full strength, it would be difficult to do so. Of course, the Jade Emperor knew that it was impossible to defeat Yi Qing with such an attack alone. However, the Jade Emperor still felt deeply humiliated and angry in his heart. Yi Qing actually looked down on him so much. She did not even use a sword. She actually only used a finger to fight with him. Did she think that she could defeat him with a finger? Under such anger, the Jade Emperor's strength broke out to a more powerful level. At the same time, he also got close to Yi Qing. Both sides directly carried out a battle in the air that was beyond the imagination of all the primitive level experts. Is this the limit of power? Such a battle not only shocked the 6 great sages, but also Guhan, who was watching the battle on the side, was deeply shocked. He was not shocked by the strength of the 2 sides in the battle, but shocked by the fighting power that both sides showed in the battle that transcended the rules. Guhan asked himself, if he rushed to the battlefield to help Yi Qing with his current strength, He was afraid that he would not even be able to withstand the aftermath of the battle between both sides. He would die under the attack of the Jade Emperor in less than 10 seconds. Ever since he had comprehended the laws, Ji Yuhan had always felt that no one could defeat him in terms of realm. Even if it was the Sword Emperor, their strongest trump card was merely the power of laws. But through the battle between the Jade Emperor and Yi Qing, Guhan actually saw a power that transcended the power of rules. This was a power that Guhan had never imagined. In the face of such power, Guhan was as fragile as a child. This is my next direction. However, Guhan was not frightened by such power. Instead, he became a little comfortable. After creating the sword technique Chaos Coalescence, Guhan felt that his swordsmanship could not improve at all. He could not find the direction to move forward. It was not until he saw the battle between the Jade Emperor and Yi Qing that Guhan found the direction to improve. This road of swordsmanship could take a step forward again. Chapter 1340. Follow me. Guhan, who was acting as a spectator at the edge of the battlefield, suddenly heard Yi Qing's voice. Before he could react, he felt his body lighten, and then he floated up. My body. Guhan looked at his original position, and was shocked to find that his physical body was still standing there, but his consciousness had clearly flown up. Could this be an out-of-body experience? While Ji Yuhan was thinking, his consciousness had already floated to the center of the battlefield. He was surrounded by all sorts of shockwaves from the battle between the Jade Emperor and Zhe Tian. As long as he was touched by these shockwaves, all sword-bearers below Spirit Sword rank, including Yuenko, would die without a doubt. Spirit sword-bearers could at most last 3 to 4 seconds, while immortal sword-bearers might be able to last 1 or 2 minutes, but that was to no avail. In the end, they would all die. It was in such a dangerous area of the battlefield that Guhan's consciousness could move quickly, completely unaffected by the aftershocks of the battle. Finally, it floated to Yi Qing's side, and then entered her body. This is Yi Qing's vision. When Guhan entered Yi Qing's body, he found that he had entered a state of sharing vision with Yi Qing, or rather, it was not just vision sharing. Guhan could clearly feel the various sensations in Yi Qing's body, and even the flow of the sword essence in her body. Guhan could even faintly feel the power that surpassed the rules in Yi Qing's body. Qing-er. Guhan instantly understood Yi Qing's intention. Yi Qing wanted to let Guhan experience this battle from an unprecedented first-person perspective. This was far more useful in improving Guhan's strength and comprehension than a spectator's perspective. This was indeed the case. From Yi Qing's perspective, Guhan absorbed everything in front of him like a drunkard. Because Guhan was just a spectator, he didn't need to consider the various matters and techniques of the battle like Yi Qing did. He only needed to analyze and absorb everything in front of him. Even the Jade Emperor's battle techniques could be absorbed into his own knowledge. Guhan was like a dry sponge, crazily absorbing everything he saw and comprehended. Husband. Get ready to take over Qing-er's body. Qing-er will only give you 10 seconds. Suddenly, Yi Qing's voice rang in Guhan's ears. Using Yi Qing's body to fight. Like this. Guhan's heart trembled, but he understood that this was the best opportunity Yi Qing had fought for him. Without any hesitation, he replied decisively, I'm ready. Good. Yi Qing said calmly. In the next second, Guhan, who was a spectator, completely took over Yi Qing's body. At the same time, he could more clearly sense the existence that surpassed the rules. This existence was so mysterious that Guhan couldn't understand it at all, but Guhan could continuously obtain a kind of comprehension from it. This comprehension made Guhan feel as if he could control everything in the world, including the air. He even felt as if the sky above his head was just a balloon, and the ground under his feet was just a stone that could be controlled according to his will. It was as if he had become the master of the entire heaven and earth, or rather, the entire world, or even the entire universe. With the help of this comprehension, Guhan directly used everything he had mastered, be it the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, the Chaos Sword technique, or even what he had learned from Yi Qing and the Emperor. All of them fused together without any hindrance. The fusion of these things made Guhan gradually feel as if something, or rather, a move, was waving at him. This move was the last move of the Chaos Sword technique that Guhan had been searching for a long time, but he still couldn't find any clues. It was also the 7th move of the Chaos Sword technique. Unfortunately, 10 seconds was still too short. When Guhan vaguely felt as if he had grasped something, he completely lost control of Yi Qing's body. Even his will directly left Yi Qing's body and returned to his own body outside the battlefield. Once again, he completely returned to the perspective of a spectator. At this time, the battle was nearing its end. After a few violent collisions, the Jade Emperor and Zhetian Zhendi both stopped attacking and stood opposite each other. The entire battlefield instantly returned to a calm state, as if the intense battle just now had never happened. This battle has probably been going on for 10,000 years. When Guhan came back to his senses, he felt as if 10,000 years had passed. However, when Guhan looked down at the system time, he was shocked to find that such an exciting battle had only passed for 2 minutes. In Guhan's mind, it was clearly more than 2 hours. My intuition can't be wrong. This battle can't have only lasted for 2 minutes. Just now, I was in Qing'er's body for more than 30 minutes. Could it be that the strength of both sides have transcended beyond time? Thinking of this, Guhan couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. I can't believe you've also reached this realm. When the two of them separated from the battle, they both seemed to be in good condition. Their clothes were still intact, and there were no wounds on their bodies. Not even a speck of dust could be seen. It didn't seem like the two of them had gone through an intense battle. Instead, it was as if they had taken a stroll in a spring breeze. Yes, I'm here. Yi Qing nodded his head and admitted very readily. Are you like me? Did you kill your own true self? The Jade Emperor's face didn't show any special expression. He only asked calmly, as if they were two normal friends talking. I'm a sword wielder, and you're a cultivator. I walk on the great way of sword, but you walk on the great way of killing 3 corpses. How can I kill my real self like you? Yi Qing smiled. Where can I find a real self to kill? Then did you sacrifice something to reach this stage? The Jade Emperor asked again. If you ask me what I sacrificed, then I have indeed sacrificed something. Yi Qing nodded. But I am different from you. You sacrificed your future, while I sacrificed my past. Past? The Jade Emperor's calm face finally showed a strange expression. How should I sacrifice my past? If I sacrifice my past, is there still a path for the future? Of course there is a path for the future. Yi Qing nodded. Then can you still take that step? The Jade Emperor suddenly became a little excited when he heard Yi Qing's words. Of course. I told you, my future is still there. Yi Qing laughed. Is that so? I'm so envious of you. You still have the chance to take that step, unlike me. Even though I'm the Jade Emperor, I'm just a pitiful pawn in the end. The Jade Emperor sighed and silently closed his eyes. Then, a dimensional vortex slowly opened up, and the Jade Emperor's corpse was peacefully sucked into it. He's dead. Except for Guhan, who vaguely felt that when the Jade Emperor and Zhetian Zhendi separated, it meant that the outcome of the battle was already decided. The rest of the people thought that this was just an intermission between the two of them. It was not until the Jade Emperor's dimensional vortex appeared that everyone suddenly realized that when the two of them separated, their fates were already decided. No wonder the Jade Emperor could be so calm and peaceful just now. It turned out that the Jade Emperor already knew that he was going to die, so he completely let go of a lot of things and became calm and peaceful. As the saying goes, when a man is about to die, his words are kind. This was the truth. With the death of the Jade Emperor, the battle with the Heavenly Court was completely over. Seeing that their only support was gone, the other 4 celestial emperors of the Heavenly Court knew that there was absolutely no possibility of reconciliation between themselves and the 6 great sages of Yuan Ku and the extremely terrifying Yi Qing. Moreover, they did not want to live in such humiliation. Therefore, after the death of the Jade Emperor, the remaining 4 celestial emperors looked at each other and chose to self-destruct at the same time. Then, their remnant souls slowly floated to various places in the world, just like the 6 great sages. If someone regained the 3 treasures of heaven and earth, they might be able to resurrect the 4 celestial emperors. As for the Jade Emperor, He had already returned to the dimensional vortex, and there was absolutely no possibility of him being resurrected. "Aren't you going to stop these remnant souls?" Seeing that the 6 great sages watched the 4 remnant souls of the celestial emperors leave indifferently, Liuyan Ling asked curiously. "There's no need for that." Heaven's equal Jendi shook his head, then looked at the other 4 great sages around him, and said coldly, "The alliance between the 6 of us has ended, and the structure of this world has returned to the era 800 years ago. The opponents of us humans have become these Yuan Ku who have broken through dimensions from all directions." Liuyan Ling choked a little, and said with some surprise, "But just now, you were comrades fighting side by side." "Not anymore." Heaven's equal Jendi shook his head, "But don't worry, we won't be fighting for a while. With Zhetian Jendi around, even if these Yuan Ku have 10,000 guts, they will not dare to have any ideas on us humans. We also don't have the time to find trouble with these Yuan Ku now. We just want to save the remaining humans from the brainwashing of the heavenly court, and then rebuild our human civilization. So, at least in these 10 years, we can still maintain a relatively peaceful state. Only our disciples know what will happen after that." Heaven's equal Jendi sighed. "Is it because of Yi Qing's deterrence? Speaking of which, what realm and level did they enter in the end? It feels like the battle between Yi Qing and the Jade Emperor is beyond my understanding." Liuyan Ling sighed, and wanted to search for Yi Qing's figure in the sky, but she saw nothing except the blue sky. When Liuyan Ling planned to search for Guhan, she found that Guhan had also disappeared. "This lecherous bastard, how dare he say that he likes me?" Liuyan Ling muttered with extreme dissatisfaction. She knew that at this time, Guhan was most likely flirting with Yi Qing, but Liuyan Ling did not want to disturb these two. After all, there was no need for Liuyan Ling to be jealous of a guy who had been dead for more than 700 years. Chapter 1341. What's going on with this dungeon? Tell me the truth, are you playing tricks behind the scenes? Guhan and Yi Qing passed through the void and arrived on an island in the middle of a peaceful ocean. It was peaceful and warm here. The sea breeze was blowing, and the trees were lush. Birds were chirping and flowers were fragrant. It was a perfect island for a vacation. Yi Qing had taken the initiative to bring Guhan here. As soon as the battle ended, Yi Qing brought Guhan to this beautiful island to spend time with the two of them. "What did you say, husband?" Yi Qing doesn't understand. Yi Qing blinked innocently, as if she didn't know anything. "You don't have to hide it from me. I've always felt that this dungeon is very strange. All the mission prompts changed without warning. When we fought against the heavenly court at the end, there wasn't even a mission prompt. I'm afraid this isn't a proper dungeon," Guhan said calmly. "It's more like someone deliberately manipulated a game, but she forgot to give out the mission prompt. Annoying. Husband, you're so smart. You're going to lose a lot of sisters in the future," Yi Qing said with a smile. She didn't have the domineering air she had when she killed the Jade Emperor. She had returned to being a little girl. "What's going on? How much longer are you going to hide it from me?" Guhan sighed and looked into Yi Qing's eyes. "I never planned to hide it from you. Since you want to know, then I'll tell you." Yi Qing squinted her eyes and said, "My husband, you're right. Qing is indeed the mastermind behind all of this. Although Ju Yu is beyond Qing expectations, he is just a tool that Qing has raised. In fact, everything is under Qing control. That Ju Yu was really indulged by you." Guhan smiled bitterly. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "If I'm not wrong, that creature's brain is actually your brain. Actually, the control of this brain has always been in your hands. That Ju Yu is just an arrogant fool that you indulge. Husband, why are you so smart?" Yi Qing rolled her eyes at Guhan and nodded. "That's right. Just as outsiders know, the entire BAT project was built by me, and the vital biological brain of the entire BAT project was constructed from half of Qing brain and half of her soul. This biological brain has always been controlled by Qing. The Qing you saw in the dungeon was actually arranged and planned by Qing. No wonder Tomono Kakaze couldn't control you at all and couldn't find any clues. At first, I was really naive to think that you had set up some background program to remove all traces. Now it seems that you did it yourself. No wonder Tomono Kakaze was so pitiful because of you. Guhan laughed. Is my husband protesting for little sister Tomono Kakaze? Yi Qing said with a face full of grievance. Of course not. Guhan shook his head. Without your help, I wouldn't be where I am now. Why would I blame you? Even if you blame me, Qing'er won't hate you. Qing'er owes you everything, Qing'er said, leaning half of her body into Guhan's arms. She said faintly, but my husband, there's one thing you haven't guessed. This biological brain was not only cultivated with half of Qing'er's brain cells, but also about 1% of it is your brain cells. What? Hearing this, Guhan's body couldn't help but tremble. It seemed that Guhan had never thought of this. How could Guhan imagine that the huge and somewhat ugly biological brain he saw in reality had 1% of his own cells in it? Husband, have you forgotten? Why were you able to achieve 100 quarks of acquired sword essence in just a few days? Yi Qing said with a pout. At the same time, she kept groping around Guhan's waist with her little hand. It's the sword essence oral solution, Guhan said in a daze. Ever since he entered the Shanghai Pass fortress, Guhan had almost forgotten about the sword essence oral solution. Although the sword essence oral solution could quickly increase the acquired sword essence in his body, Guhan still faintly rejected it. The magical effect of the sword essence oral solution was something that Guhan couldn't understand. Guhan was also worried that the acquired sword essence due to the sword essence oral solution would become a problem for him in the future. Therefore, after Guhan became a famed sword wielder, he completely gave up on the sword essence oral solution. Anyway, it was not difficult for Guhan to fight for sword essence in reality, so Guhan really didn't need to improve his sword essence in the game. However, when Guhan heard from Yi Qing that 1% of the cells in the biological brain belonged to him, Guhan vaguely understood why the sword essence oral solution had such a magical effect. Soon, Yi Qing confirmed his conjecture. It seems like you've thought it through, darling. That's right. What you consumed wasn't some sword essence oral liquid at all. Instead, it was the sword essence stored in your brain cells. When you entered the game, these brain cells automatically transferred the sword essence contained in their bodies to your soul. Then, they followed your soul and returned to your body. This living creature's brain is actually like a bank. Back then, you stored some sword essences in this bank, and now you've taken them out again. Therefore, you can use these acquired sword essences without worry, because they originally belonged to you, my husband. After Yi Qing finished speaking, the huge foreshadowing and huge pit on Guhan finally came to an end. In other words, this is my future self handing over the sword essence in my body to my past self, Guhan said with a grin. This was something that Guhan had never thought of. So, this dungeon was actually designed by you as well? But why did you go through so much trouble to design this dungeon? Guhan asked again. Because this is the last gift that I can give you, darling. Yi Qing said gently, the road ahead seems long, but in fact, it's imminent. Darling, you don't have much time left. If you can master the power of the way of heaven before the last moment, you will eventually fall into a tragic fate, and this world will never be able to welcome peace. However, it's too difficult to understand the power of the way of heaven with your own strength. Even the 6 sages in the past had a clear understanding of the way of heaven after thousands of years, and they became sages. Yi Qing believes that if you give me thousands of years. No, as long as you have 10,000 years, I believe that you can understand the existence of the way of heaven. However, darling, you can't have that much time, so I can only help you cheat and open a door for you, so that you can see a trace of the way of heaven through the crack of the door. This way, we still have a chance of survival, Yi Qing said with a little worry. I see. That's why you let my consciousness enter your body. Moreover, I did feel that mysterious power. Is that power called the way of heaven? Guhan said with a little disappointment. Now that he recalled the power of the way of heaven that he had once controlled, he felt extremely excited. He wanted to feel that power again. It was a power that was as tempting as a drug. Once he tasted the feeling of the power of the way of heaven, All the desires in the world seemed to be insignificant compared to the power of the way of heaven. For the rest of Guhan's life, the power of the way of heaven was the biggest pursuit. Yes, darling. That is the power of the way of heaven. Yi Qing nodded. Qing, since you can use the power of the way of heaven, does that mean that you have broken through the limit of an emperor sword wielder and entered the legendary realm that surpasses an emperor sword? At the mention of the way of heaven, Guhan instinctively thought of this question. After flipping through all the information and documents in the past 1,000 years, even the unparalleled Kunzu's power was only at the limit of an emperor sword wielder. Guhan had never seen the words realm of the way of heaven in any of the documents. Could it be that Zhetian Jendi had hidden it so deeply? No. How could Qing be able to control the power of the way of heaven? If Qing could really control the power of the way of heaven, Qing wouldn't have gone to another world in the end. Yi Qing smiled bitterly. Just now, whether it was the Jade Emperor or Qing herself, they had only opened up a part of the way of heaven. At most, they could only be considered to have taken one step. If they wanted to put another foot into the door of the way of heaven, it would be extremely difficult. Qing, what exactly is the power system above the Sword Emperor? Tell me about it. Yi Qing's words caused Ji Han to feel a wave of confusion, and he couldn't help but ask. There is indeed a realm above Jendi, and that is the Sage. The supreme power in the world is called the Way. The Way is divided into the Way of Heaven and the Great Way. The Great Way can only be pursued and cannot be described. It is a power that can never be controlled. The Way of Heaven is the projection of the Great Way in this world. It is also the supreme power that living things can control. The so-called sage can control and use the power of the way of heaven. However, at the same time, the sage will become a chess piece of the way of heaven and be restricted by the way of heaven. It's funny to think about it. The biggest dream of all living things in the world is to become a chess piece of the way of heaven. As for the Jade Emperor and I, to give you an example, we only have the phone number of the way of heaven. We can get in touch with the way of heaven and receive a little bit of charity from the way of heaven. That's all. When facing a sage who can use the power of the way of heaven freely, we are far inferior. Is that so? Hearing this, Guhan was excited. If he could reach such a terrifying level with just a little bit of power, if he really became a sage, how powerful would he be? When he thought that sect leader Tongtian was such a powerful sage, Guhan's heart skipped a beat. In the face of such an opponent, all of Guhan's confidence disappeared. Chapter 1342. Husband, don't worry. Qing believes that husband will definitely be able to save himself, save us, and save the fate of the entire world. Qing smiled. Now that husband has sensed the power of the heavenly way, in the future, when you can communicate with the heavenly way in reality, you will have a chance to become a sage. Husband, if you can grasp this opportunity, you will definitely be able to break through. Alright, I've thought through most of the things. However, there's one thing that I don't understand. Why did you nurture Ju Yu? Ju Yu's existence is completely unnecessary. You could have just destroyed his soul fragment the moment his soul entered the creature's brain. It wouldn't have affected your plan at all. Moreover, what's the point of this Emperor Sword instance dungeon? Why didn't you just arrange a single-player instance dungeon for me? Why did you drag so many people into this? This is completely unnecessary. Guhan frowned as he asked. This was something that Guhan did not understand. This. Hearing Guhan's question, Yi Qing suddenly became hesitant. There was a rare conflicted expression on his face. He did not answer Guhan's question for a long time. This was completely different from the Yi Qing who had told him everything he knew. Is there something that you don't want me to know? Through the change in Yi Qing's expression, Guhan acutely realized that there might not be a simple reason behind this question. There might even be something that Guhan did not expect. Husband, it's better that you don't know about this. Let Qing bear all of this alone. Yi Qing suddenly stood up from Guhan's body and said firmly, "You're not willing to tell me. This means that there's something shameful here." Guhan's expression changed. After a moment of silence, he said, "If you're not willing to tell me, I'll make a guess myself." It doesn't matter if it's Ju Yu or the Emperor Sword level instance dungeon that has trapped millions of souls, they are actually not necessary. However, you insisted on adding them into the instance dungeon. This means that their existence is necessary. Or rather, it can't be done without them. If what you've told me before is the truth, then your goal this time is to let me feel the power of the heavenly Tao in advance and open that door for me to move forward. The souls of Ju Yu and these people are the key to achieving this goal. Because I've experienced the power of the heavenly axiom, I already know that it's a form of power that transcends all known human powers. I don't think a mere biological brain and a virtual game system can simulate such power. Otherwise, why didn't you give the previous Emperor Sword wielders such an experience? Even if the average Emperor Sword wielder could not reach my level of talent, there was no harm in trying. What if there was an exception? After all, there's nothing to lose from the game. Or is it that there's a huge price to pay for me to experience the heavenly axiom, a price that the entire human society cannot afford a second time? Husband. Yi Qing took a few steps back weakly and sat on the beach. There was helplessness, fear, and pain in her eyes. Husband. Why do you have to be so smart? It seems like I've guessed correctly. Gu Han's initially smiling face suddenly turned pale. The price for me to feel the power of the heavenly axiom is the souls of these millions of people. As he said that, Gu Han took a step closer to Yi Qing. Do you need to exhaust the souls of these millions of people in exchange for 10 seconds of communication with the heavenly axiom? Yi Qing did not speak. She only lowered her head. However, her silence explained everything. At this point, the truth about the instance dungeon was finally clear. This instance dungeon had been Yi Qing's plan from the beginning to the end. Her goal was to exhaust the souls of these millions of people so that Gu Han could feel the power of the heavenly axiom for around 10 seconds. Initially, Yi Qing might have wanted to find some other excuse to achieve this goal. However, Ju Yu's appearance had undoubtedly given Yi Qing an excellent shield. Ju Yu had trapped all the souls in the game. In this process, there would be 1 or 2 instance dungeon mutations and the consumption of millions of human souls. This became a very normal thing. No one would suspect that this matter had anything to do with Yi Qing, who had died 700 years ago. No one would suspect that this matter had anything to do with Gu Han, who had bravely entered the instance dungeon in hopes of saving everyone. Everything had become a pure accident. Gu Han was still a hero. Those souls who had died were just unlucky people. How many souls were sacrificed this time? How many souls can survive? Ji Yu Han did not reprimand Yi Qing. Instead, he asked in a calm and direct manner. There are a total of 26 million souls trapped in this instance dungeon. About 2 million souls have completely dissipated. The remaining 26 million souls have been severely depleted. A large portion of them might suffer from serious mental illness when they return to their bodies. Some might even have their lifespan reduced by a year or even a few decades, Yi Qing said with her head lowered. What about the souls of the sword bearers? What happened to their souls? Gu Han asked again. I've only extracted about half of their soul energy. Their lives and mental state should be able to recover very quickly. However, their lifespan might be reduced by around 10 years, Yi Qing answered. Then, Song Hammer. Song Hammer is husband's good friend. Of course, Qing'er knows what's important. Song Hammer's soul is safe and sound. There's also Ou Zhen's soul and Mingyue's soul. Qing'er has purposely avoided the souls of everyone who has interacted with husband. They will be fine, Yi Qing replied. Sigh. Gu Han let out a long sigh. It was unknown whether this sigh was a happy sigh or a sad one. The two of them fell into silence again. Yi Qing could not help but ask Gu Han, husband, will you hate Qing'er from now on? Will you think of Qing'er as a cruel and terrifying woman? When Yi Qing asked this question, she was like a mortal waiting to be judged. If Gu Han answered yes, you are indeed a cruel and terrifying woman, Gu Han's answer caused Yi Qing's breath to become stuck in her throat. But so what if I'm cruel and terrifying? In the end, you still did this for me. I'm not the kind of man who can't see the situation clearly. I only seek forgiveness and purity in my heart. Guhan paused. Although I didn't know your plan from the beginning, and although I would have stopped you after knowing your plan, there's one thing that can't be changed. You didn't do this for yourself, but for me. I'm the main culprit behind everything. That's not it. Husband. All of this was Qing Er's own decision. All of this has nothing to do with husband. Husband, please don't say such things. When Yi Qing heard Ji Yuhan's words, she immediately became anxious. I haven't finished speaking. Guhan helped Yi Qing up from the beach. Do you think I'm the kind of useless person who regrets my past mistakes and blames myself for the rest of my life? Since it's already happened, it's meaningless to feel guilty and regret. The only way is to make the sacrifice of these souls worthwhile. I'm no longer alone. I'm shouldering the souls of 2 million people. I won't let their sacrifice be meaningless. I'll definitely make their sacrifice worthwhile, although they may not be willing to make such a sacrifice. Husband, don't worry. I won't blame you, and I won't hate you. You're my woman. At this point, Guhan suddenly hugged Yi Qing in his arms. He lowered his head and kissed Yi Qing's lips. Husband. Yi Qing could no longer control her emotions. Tears flowed down from the corners of her eyes like a waterfall. She hugged Guhan passionately, letting every inch of her skin stick closely to Guhan. The moment the two of them touched each other, Yi Qing snapped her fingers. Their clothes disappeared without a trace, and they hugged each other naked. Husband, Qing wants it. Yi Qing moaned. Okay. Guhan didn't refuse. He immediately got on top of her. Due to well-known reasons, what happened next couldn't be described. This was probably the most complicated sex experience in Guhan's life. To have sex with the souls of 2 million people on his back was an unimaginable experience for both his mind and body. After a few rounds of indulgence, the two of them finally separated once more. Ji Yuhan held Yi Qing in his arms, and at the same time, gently caressed every inch of Yi Qing's skin. The ticklish feeling of Ji Yuhan's fingers brushing across her skin caused Yi Qing's body to tremble uncontrollably. So beautiful. Just like a piece of silk. Guhan praised sincerely. Husband, if you like it. Qing will be a brocade quilt for you every day in the future. Yi Qing moaned. When will it be in the future? When I become a sage? Guhan sighed. There was a hint of sadness in his tone. Will I still be able to see you in the game in the future? Husband. You don't have to say any more. I know you. You're definitely not a selfish woman. If you really sacrificed the souls of 2 million people for nothing, I'm afraid you wouldn't have the courage to have a night of pleasure with me. A bitter smile appeared on Ji Yuhan's face. Within those 2 million souls, does that include your soul? Husband, why do you have to be so smart? Qing can't even sneak away. Yi Qing smiled sadly, and her figure gradually faded. Chapter 1343. Dear viewers, the Sword Maiden online incident that everyone is concerned about has finally come to an end. The last batch of 1.62 million people who were trapped in the game have woken up from their dreams. Unfortunately, because they were trapped in the game for too long, 2 million of their compatriots have left forever. This is a moment worthy of a moment of silence for all our compatriots. According to the proposal of the Sword Committee, the 8 base cities will hold a 3-day mourning ceremony to mourn for the compatriots who died in Sword Maiden Online. All the members of the Sword Committee and the Council of the base cities will attend this mourning event. His Majesty Jendi will give a speech during this mourning event, encouraging those who survived to put aside their grief and move forward. In 10 minutes, we will replay the interview with His Majesty Guhan. In the interview, His Majesty C Emperor will tell you in detail the story of how he defeated Yuan Ku and Ju Yu and rescued all mankind. In this interview, His Majesty C Emperor will tell you in detail how he deceived Ju Yu's trust and finally succeeded in drawing Ju Yu's soul out of the living brain. Finally, His Majesty C Emperor brought his beloved disciple and Miss Liunian Ling into the dangerous game world together to save the souls of 3.2 million people who were trapped. As for the question of whether Sword Maiden Online can be restarted, the experts of the Sword Committee are conducting a re-evaluation of the creature's brain. After confirming that there are no hidden souls in it, A referendum will be held to decide whether Sword Maiden Online should be restarted. That's all the latest news about this incident. For more news, you can follow our official Weibo and WeChat account, and watch the replay of His Majesty C Emperor's interview below. In a restaurant, the TV station was rolling the news about the Sword Maiden Online incident. Because this was big news that affected every human being and caused the death of more than 2 million people, the heat of this news had completely overshadowed the heat of C Emperor's ascension to the throne. It had become the hottest news on every TV station. Thanks to His Majesty C Emperor. If it weren't for him, my buttface would have died in the game forever, an old man said to his friend while watching the news at the table. Yeah. I watched that interview 3 times. His Majesty, the Sea King, had a hard time. This time, the tens of millions of people were able to escape from death, and it was all because of His Majesty, the Sea King. This old man doesn't have anything good except for 3 bottles of Red Star Erguatu that I hid when my son was born. It's been more than 30 years. I want to give these 3 bottles to His Majesty the Sea Emperor as a token of my appreciation. After all, my son's life was saved by His Majesty the Sea Emperor. Come on. How could His Majesty the Sea Emperor accept your lousy 3rd-grade wine? The other man rolled his eyes. However, this time, His Majesty the Ocean Emperor has indeed worked hard and performed a great service. He is our great benefactor. Sigh, 2 of my 3 sons could not hold on and died in that whatever instance dungeon. Thanks to His Majesty the Sea Emperor, my last youngest son was saved. Although he became a little stupid, at least his life was saved. My old Chi family is not extinct. At this point, a few turbid tears flowed from the corners of the old man's eyes. Come. Let us propose a toast to His Majesty the Sea God. That's right. Together. Let us propose a toast to His Majesty the Sea Emperor. The 2 old men clinked their wine glasses and wished His Majesty the Sea Emperor a long life. Then, they gulped down the white wine in their glasses. Just as the 2 of them were feeling emotional, an extremely loud noise suddenly came from the street outside the restaurant. It sounded like there were at least a few thousand people talking. Everyone was shouting slogans in unison. After listening carefully, they found that the slogans were all like this. Guhan is not a hero. He is a murderer. That evil thief Guhan killed tens of thousands of people in Yangjing City. He killed our loved ones. The blood of tens of thousands of people cannot be shed in vain. The bright blue sky cannot be covered. A life for a life is a matter of course. 1 sword from Guhan, 10,000 people cry. As long as Guhan is not dead, the demonstration will not stop. Through the glass windows of the restaurant, they could see a large group of people carrying various kinds of signs walking through the street. They shouted slogans in unison, demanding the government to punish Guhan and avenge their dead loved ones. What the hell is going on? Isn't Guhan His Majesty the Sea Emperor? What did His Majesty do wrong? Why are they doing this? Hearing the slogans outside, an old man couldn't help but angrily ask. Isn't it because he wanted to trick Juyu out of the brain? His Majesty the Sea Emperor had no choice but to endure the pain in his heart and kill tens of thousands of people. Otherwise, how could that extremely cunning Juyu believe that His Majesty the Sea Emperor had left Yangjing City and escaped from the brain? His Majesty the Sea Emperor was forced to do this. So that's how it is. The old man nodded. Then I also heard that His Majesty the Sea Emperor only cut off a portion of their limbs in order to minimize injuries. It looks bloody, but in fact, as long as they are placed in the medical bay in time, there will be no problem. But His Majesty the Sea Emperor is not a god after all. How could his sword be just right? It's inevitable that he doesn't kill people. How can these people be so ignorant and unreasonable? His Majesty the Sea Emperor had to make a choice for the majority of people. Since His Majesty the Sea Emperor can make such a sacrifice, why can't they do the same? Actually, I heard that the compensation work between the families and the government was not done well. The government was only willing to pay 200,000 renminbi per person, but the families insisted on 1 million renminbi per life. Of course, the government would not agree. After 2 or 3 days of negotiation, these people gathered together and started to cause trouble. An old man said, 200,000 renminbi? What else do they have to say? Didn't my 2 sons only pay that much? This old man thinks it's very fair, but they still have to say something. The old man whose 2 sons died was so angry that his face turned red. Everyone should talk about fairness. Why do they dare to ask for compensation of 1 million renminbi? If the government really pays that much, we'll go and cause trouble too. Yes. Yes. The 2 old men repeatedly said yes. They drank a glass of wine and began to denounce the people who were protesting outside. They did not know how to sacrifice for humanity, and only cared about their own families and did not care about the overall situation of humanity. Just as the protesting group was halfway through, police sirens suddenly sounded. Countless police officers rushed out from all directions and surrounded the protesting group. Then, a police leader stood on a high place and used a loudspeaker to explain to the protesting group, hoping that the families would forgive and understand His Majesty the Emperor and voluntarily leave. How could those angry families listen to the police leader's words? They shouted their slogans and began to attack the line of defense formed by the police. They wanted to rush to the hotel that Guhan was temporarily staying at to find Guhan and settle accounts with him. Do it. The police chief, who had already received the order from above, did not hesitate. Countless police officers waved the baseball bat-like electric batons in their hands and began to hit the families. These electric batons carried a strong electric current. Once hit by the electric batons, the person would immediately fall into a state of numbness and would not be able to resist at all. The defenseless family members were no match for the police. In just a short while, they were all knocked out by the electric batons. Then, they were thrown onto the hover trucks and dragged into the police station like pigs. Well done. Well done. How dare they slander His Majesty the Emperor? Not bad. How dare they ask for compensation of 1 million renminbi? *CK them. The diners in the hotel applauded and cheered when they saw the decisive action of the police. Later, under the education of the police station, most of the families honestly admitted their mistakes, expressed that they understood His Majesty Guhan's painstaking efforts, and were willing to accept the government's compensation of 200,000 renminbi. Of course, there were also some relatives who did not care about money. They expressed that they did not want any compensation, as long as Guhan paid with his life. In the end, these family members never came out of the police station. These family members wanted to seek support and sympathy from the society through the media. In the end, because most of the people were saved because of Guhan, not only did they not sympathize with these family members who were arrested, but they also scolded these family members on the internet and in real life for not knowing what was good for them. They only wanted high compensation, and did not know what was good for humanity. With the voices of the entire society being divided, under the suppression of such forceful methods, the social fluctuations quickly calmed down. After waiting for 3 to 4 years, no one remembered that 20 to 30,000 people had died in the hands of Jiyu Han. After another few decades, the memorial and mourning activities for this incident also fell into a low tide. When the family members of the victims died, this incident was almost completely forgotten, and it did not affect the illustrious reputation of the great His Majesty Guhan in the future. If they knew that you deliberately killed those tens of thousands of people, and that as long as you had kindness in your heart, those people could have survived, would they still support you like now? Seeing the story that happened in the restaurant, a man wearing sunglasses and a robe sitting at the corner of the table asked the man wearing the same robe and sunglasses sitting opposite him. "I don't know." Guhan shook his head and sneered, "But even if they know, what can they do? They still need to thank me for saving their lives, right?" "I see." Xian said expressionlessly, "When I first heard your story, I thought you were a good person. Now it seems I was wrong. So you think I am a bad person?" Guhan asked with a smile. "No." Xian shook his head and said solemnly, "You are a great man." Chapter 1344. Today was the 3rd day since Guhan left the dungeon. In these 3 days, Guhan had been dealing with all kinds of aftermath. This included his first interview with the television media in his life, where he described the entire incident in detail. Coupled with the various videos he had recorded at the time, he successfully cleared his name and turned from a murderer to a savior of mankind. Gu Han even took the initiative to comfort the families of the dead and injured. He gave a large sum of money to the parents of those who lost their loved ones. Gu Han only gave the money to the parents of those who died trapped in the dungeon. As for the relatives of those who were killed by Gu Han during the demonstrations, Gu Han did not even show his face. He treated them as if they did not exist. Apart from that, perhaps out of guilt, Ji Han even took out 40 billion renminbi to entrust the Lionian clan's subordinate organizations to set up a sword Maiden online dungeon survivor and family protection fund. The 40 billion renminbi would be used to protect the pitiful people who suffered from various illnesses due to the dungeon incident, as well as those who lost their loved ones. Of course, the fund would not be of any use to those who did not die in the dungeon. This became one of the reasons why the relatives of those who died protested in the streets. They felt that Gu Han was too unfair. Why would Gu Han compensate those who did not die in Gu Han's hands but not their loved ones who died in Gu Han's hands? This was the only thing Gu Han could do. After settling these matters, Gu Han received Shen's invitation to meet him in this small restaurant. This restaurant's silk stockings, milk tea, and Hong Kong-style refreshments are pretty good. It's the most authentic Hong Kong-style tea house I've eaten in the past 500 years. I guarantee that if I didn't bring you here, you wouldn't be able to taste such an authentic Hong Kong-style tea house. Try it. Shen squeezed out a smile and said. Ji Han ate a few mouthfuls of the dishes Shen praised. He realized the dishes were mainly light and sweet. Maybe it was delicious for some people, but it couldn't satisfy Ji Han's taste. Ji Han preferred to eat spicy dishes. Ji Han was a bit surprised. Ji Han ate a lot of spicy dishes. But out of respect for Shen and the food, Gu Han still finished the food in front of him. But when Ji Han finished eating, he noticed that Shen only took a small bite before pushing the food to the side. He didn't take another bite. Unexpected. The taste of the food has completely changed the second time I came here. It no longer has the authentic Hong Kong taste. Shen sighed and said. Did the restaurant change its chef? Gu Han asked calmly. Maybe. Shen thought for a while. The last time I came, the owner was an old man with white hair. Now he has become a young man in his 20s. The owner must have changed. Gu Han was stunned and asked again, Mr. Shen, how long has it been since you came to this restaurant? I can't remember. Shen waved his hand, maybe 40 to 50 years. As expected. The owner of this restaurant is probably the great-grandson or even great-grandson of the previous owner, Gu Han thought. He looked at Shen and said, We have eaten. Mr. Shen, can you tell me the real reason why you asked me to come here? It's nothing big. Didn't I tell you before you entered the dungeon that if you can successfully save these people, I will give you the thing Jiu Xuanwu asked me to pass to you? Shen curled his lips. Now it's time for me to fulfill my promise. Although I don't think it's a good thing to pass this thing to you. Shen took out a sword case out of thin air and placed it in front of Gu Han. Cactus. Gu Han couldn't help but exclaim when he opened the case. Inside the case was the last of the 4 celestial banishing swords, Cactus. Isn't Cactus in the hands of the Jade Emperor? Why is it here? Looking at the genuine captive immortal sword in the sword sheath, Ji Han asked in disbelief. You actually know that Cactus is in the hands of the Jade Emperor? That's strange. The Jade Emperor never mentioned this embarrassing matter to anyone. I'm afraid there's no one else in the world who knows that Cactus was once in the hands of the Jade Emperor. How do you know? Shen showed a curious expression. That's right, the Jade Emperor is the Jade Emperor's. In that instant's dungeon, the Jade Emperor had once used the immortal trapping sword. That is how I know about this. Ji Han's answer was very sincere. The Jade Emperor in the dungeon used Cactus? Shen's expression changed. He looked at Gu Han suspiciously and asked, Cactus is used to kill the self. In other situations, it's not as useful as the Jade Emperor's Emperor Sword of Firmament. Why did he use Cactus to fight you? Could it be that you've already forced the Jade Emperor to the point where he has to fight by killing his true self? Ji Han didn't say anything else. He didn't expect Shen to know the truth. What if he said something else and Shen figured out the truth behind the deaths of the 2 million people? Others might not have the intelligence to do so, but Ji Yuhan believed Xian definitely had. All right. Since you don't want to say, I won't ask. Xian smiled nonchalantly when Gu Han didn't answer his question. He continued, I remember Jiyu Xuanwu asked me what to do if she wanted to steal something from the Jade Emperor. She wanted me to help her plan it. I called her a lunatic. She was just a deity-level sword wielder. She wanted to steal something from the desolation-level Yuan Ku Jade Emperor. Even I didn't dare to imagine such a thing. But after her repeated begging and pestering, I had no choice but to look through a month's worth of information. I helped her come up with a plan that only had a 1% success rate. Then Jiyu Xuanwu relied on this 1% success rate to steal Cactus. Jiyu Han's entire body tensed up. A plan that only had a 1% chance of success, Jiyu Xuanwu did it without any hesitation. Even if they were separated by 1,000 years, Jiyu Han could still clearly feel the sincerity in his heart. No. Our Miss Black Tortoise didn't think so. In the blink of an eye, she tore apart the plan that I spent a month to come up with. Then, after she became an Emperor sword, she made a small deal to exchange for this celestial trapping sword from the Jade Emperor. Gu Han almost spat out his milk tea. Very good, this was his style as a father. How much do you know about Jiyu Xuanwu? What happened to her afterwards? Do you know where she was buried? Jiyu Han looked affectionately at the sword of Cactus that his daughter left for him. After a long silence, he asked Xian hesitantly. I don't know. Xian shrugged helplessly. The last time I saw her, she told me she wanted to find a way to go home to find her father. I don't understand. She was already in her 90s at that time. Her father was at least 100 years old. Even his bones should have turned to dust. What was she looking for? Is that so? Gu Han's face twitched. He had endless love for his daughter. At the same time, his feelings for Kanzu, the culprit who separated him and his daughter, became more complicated. After all, Kanzu was his son-in-law. One more question. Why aren't you willing to give me Cactus? You said she is a disaster to me. Why is that? Gu Han asked curiously. Let me correct myself. This is not what I said. It was Jiyu Xuanwu who said it. She told me that there is a 99.9% chance that this thing is a disaster. However, there is a 0.1% chance that it is the key to saving the world. As for whether to give it to you, it is up to me. If I think that Gu Han is a trustworthy person, then I will give it to him, Xian said. So you think I am a trustworthy person? Gu Han asked. I don't know if you are a trustworthy person, but like I said, you are a great person. Xian stood up from his chair and called for the boss to settle the bill. He patted Gu Han's shoulder and said, there are still many things to do in the station. Tomono Kakaze's consciousness is still a little confused. I have a lot of things to do. I won't talk to you anymore. Oh, I almost forgot. Xian took out a small cloth bag from his dimensional pocket and gave it to Gu Han. Actually, Xuanwu asked me to pass this to you. After passing the small cloth bag to Gu Han, Xian left the restaurant and disappeared into the crowd on the street. Jiyu Han took the small cloth bag and opened it. To his surprise, he found that there was a glossy green severed black hair inside. This was a treasure that had gone through most of Jiyu Han's life since the age of 18. At this moment, it once again appeared in front of Jiyu Han. This Jiyu Xuanwu. Does she know about the problem I am facing now? Gu Han touched the severed black hair in his hand. It was obvious that his daughter knew about the huge problem he was facing in Zifu. More than 3 years ago, in order to save Yuzhang City, Jiyu Han had synchronized with the immortal-grade sword mistress Sword of Victory and temporarily transformed into an immortal-grade sword wielder. That was how he had defeated Nether River Patriarch. But this also left a huge hidden danger for Gu Han. The Sword of Victory had synchronized with Gu Han successfully. As long as Gu Han touched the hilt of the Sword of Victory, he would immediately complete the remaining steps and become the true wielder of the Sword of Victory. But this meant that Gu Han had to find a sister with the same nature for the Sword of Victory and form 2 immortal sword wielder. Otherwise, Gu Han's body would collapse and he would die within a month. But the Sword of Victory had always been a sword mistress. How could Guhan find a sword mistress for the Sword of Victory? Originally, Guhan planned to put this problem aside for the time being. But now that Immortal Cactus and Immortal Culling Sword had both appeared in front of Guhan, Guhan's Immortal Sword wielder had a better choice, that was to gather all 4 Immortal Banishing Swords. But if all 4 Immortal Banishing Swords were gathered, the Sword of Victory would definitely become a huge problem for Guhan. And there was only one way to solve this problem. That was to use the severed black hair to cut off the mark between himself and the Sword of Victory. This was the choice Guhan had to face now. Chapter 1345. Guhan wasn't someone who would hesitate in the face of a decision. After obtaining green silk and confirming that it was almost impossible for him to find a suitable sword maiden for the Victory Sword, Guhan made a firm decision to break up with the Victory Sword. In reality, Guhan and the Victory Sword never had any deep feelings for each other. Guhan had never even spoken a word to the Victory Sword, which was completely different from the Juzi Sword. Back then, the Juzi Sword was already Guhan's famed sword maiden, and it had been guarding by Guhan's side for a month or 2. Even if Guhan himself was somewhat resistant, he had already established a certain relationship with Guhan. Using green silk to cut off the Juzi Sword made Guhan feel some reluctance and shame. But for the Victory Sword, this reluctance and shame were much weaker. Moreover, when it came to matters related to his future, Guhan never hesitated. The souls of 2 million people have already fallen on my shoulders. How could I be reluctant to part with the Victory Sword? After returning to the hotel, Guhan took a deep breath, took out the green silk that was left for him by the black tortoise, and pierced it into his abdomen. It was as if the green silk beheader had pierced into the surface of the water. It lightly pierced into Ji Yuhan's abdomen, and then easily entered Ji Yuhan's zifu. However, it did not leave even the slightest scar on Ji Yuhan's skin, nor did it make Ji Yuhan feel any pain. A threat. A huge threat. At the same time, all of Guhan's sword maidens felt their hair stand on end. They instinctively felt a huge threat approaching them, a threat that could separate them from their current situation. As a result, these sword maidens didn't say anything and returned to their swords, returning to Guhan's scabbard. At the same time, their consciousness returned to Flowing Maple's purple palace and their own sword marks. When these sword maidens opened their eyes and saw the situation inside the purple palace, they were surprised to find that there was a small green fish that seemed to be alive constantly swimming in Guhan's purple palace. It seemed to be looking for something. What is this? It looks so scary. Chijian screamed as soon as she saw the green fish. She realized that all the threats she felt were coming from this green fish. It looks fun. Is this fish edible? Qing Pin was indeed an authentic foodie. The moment he saw the green fish, he asked if it was edible. She had completely forgotten that she had almost been separated from Guhan because of this green fish. Shishui didn't say anything, and no one noticed her either. However, her reaction was the biggest. The entire sword scar was trembling uncontrollably. This thing looks a little familiar. Yi Tian was not as panicked as she was. She said calmly, "Idiot Yi Tian, look at what's stuck to our butts." Du Yu's angry voice was heard. Both of them looked at the hilt of their swords that were stuck together by a lump of green stuff. After a few seconds of silence, they exclaimed at the same time, "Green silk slash." It turned out that Guhan's decision was too decisive. Before he used green silk severing, he didn't inform any of the sword maidens about it. Guhan actually used green silk severing? Does he not want me anymore? Chijian let out a sorrowful wail. She immediately felt that Ji Yuhan was going to use sever green silk to cut off her sword mark. Come on. Even if Guhan killed all of us, he wouldn't bear to kill you. After all, there's only you An. Yi Tian didn't even finish her sentence before she was interrupted by Du Yu's loud wails. Guhan must think that the relationship between siblings is too intimate. That's why he wants to separate from Du Yu. What nonsense are you thinking, Du Yu? If you were to be cut off, wouldn't I be as unlucky as you? Yi Tian said angrily. Aya. Anyway, Guhan could cut off anyone but us sisters. Us sisters aren't something that little girls like you can compare to. Extinguish immortal sword said proudly from the side. However, if she was really so sure, why would she say such a thing? You guys don't need to guess anymore. Guhan definitely wants to cut off my sword scar. A faint voice rang out. Most of the sword ladies were joking. None of them really thought that Guhan would kill their sword scar. However, the owner of the voice was really gloomy and resentful. She felt that the one who would be killed would be her. Hearing this voice, all the sword ladies suddenly fell silent. They knew that if Guhan really wanted to kick that sword lady out, then that sword lady would definitely be the past water sword. Because the past water sword was an anomaly among all the sword ladies. She seemed to be drifting away from Guhan and the sword ladies. She clearly had such an intimate relationship with Guhan, but she was so lonely. She didn't even have a sword lady that could be called a friend. Look. That fish is heading towards that corner. Juze's sword scar suddenly pointed at Green Silk Severing Sword. Everyone realized that Green Silk Severing Sword had already passed their sword scar and was flying towards the quietest corner of the Zifu. What's there? There's nothing there. Why is it going there? Du Yu asked in confusion. No. It's not that there's nothing there. Don't forget, there's still a sword scar there. Yi Tian said meaningfully. All the sword ladies immediately followed behind Green Silk Severing Sword and chased after it. Finally, when Green Silk Severing Sword stopped, an extremely illusory sword scar that looked like mist appeared in front of them. At the same time, under the gaze of all the sword ladies, Green Silk Severing Sword began to wrap around the tip of the sword scar. Just like a crossword game played by kindergarten children, Green Silk Severing Sword would start from the tip of the sword and color the sword scar. The so-called color painting was actually to dye the gas that formed the sword mark green. Once the entire sword mark turned green, then the sword mark would completely melt like ice and snow, disappearing into the cold purple palace. Green Silk Severing Sword was like a crayon that was covered with a virus. Once the virus destroyed the entire sword scar, the sword scar would completely die. Without any obstruction, the moment Green Silk Severing Sword came into contact with the Victory Sword sword scar, it successfully left a green mark on the sword scar. This meant that the Victory Sword sword scar was gradually being corroded by Green Silk Severing Sword's virus. Then, it would face the tragedy of the sword scar melting. The Victory Sword was not as magical as the Qingpin Sword. With the power of the Qingping Sword, it eventually devoured Green Silk Severing Sword. The Green Silk Severing Sword was covered in green along the Victory Sword's sword scar. The entire sword scar began to slowly melt and finally turned into white mist, completely disappearing from Guhan's Zifu. Gone. Gone just like that. Shishui said dejectedly. Her tone was filled with helplessness, as if she could see her own future. The Victory Sword is so pitiful. She didn't even see us once before she parted ways. Du Yu also said with some disappointment. Ha ha ha. There's nothing we can do about it. In order to make room for our two younger sisters, it's only right for her to sacrifice herself. Ha 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 ha. Celestial Extinguishing Sword covered his mouth and laughed. Yi Tian snorted disdainfully when he saw Celestial Extinguishing Sword's arrogance. It was obvious that he was very unhappy with Celestial Extinguishing Sword's attitude. The atmosphere in the Zifu also became somewhat gloomy. Hey, everyone, don't be sad. The Victory Sword and Guhan were not meant to be together. Moreover, she and Guhan don't have any feelings for each other. To her, this is just a small dream. There's nothing to see here. Let's go back outside. Right now, Guhan must not be feeling good. Let's go and accompany him, Chidian said to smooth things over. Chidian could already feel that the atmosphere in the Zifu was not good. Staying here was not good for anyone. It was better to leave as soon as possible. The group of sword ladies didn't say anything. They just left the Zifu one after another. Then, they automatically released their sword lady forms and uniformly rushed to surround Guhan's side. You guys, haven't you caused enough trouble in my Zifu? Do you still want to come out and cause trouble? At this time, Guhan had also come out of his meditative state. He looked at the sword ladies beside Shishui and said indifferently, Military Governor. You've really Chijian was halfway through its sentence when Guhan nodded and answered, "Yes, I've already cut off the victory sword scar. You've seen the process yourself. What's there to doubt?" Chijian still looked like it wanted to say something. "Hey." Guhan sighed and patted Chijian's shoulder. "I know what you mean. You saw the victory sword scar melt, so you felt the same way. You're afraid that one day, your sword scar will also be cut off, right?" "Yes." Chijian nodded honestly. "Actually, it's not just you. Everyone else has the same worries, right?" Guhan raised his head and looked at the eyes of every sword lady in front of him. Then, he took a deep breath and pulled out Shishui, who had been hiding in the scabbard. He released her by force and let all the 8 sword ladies stand in front of him. He raised his hand and swore solemnly, "I, Guhan, swear to my own heart that even if I, Guhan, die, I will never leave any of you. Including you. Shishui." Guhan added one last sentence to Shishui. Actually, the conversation of these sword ladies in the Zifu didn't escape Guhan's ears. It was just that Guhan didn't say anything at that time. Yes. All the sword ladies, including Shishui, nodded. The gloominess in their hearts disappeared in an instant. "Right, Celestial Jueshian, Celestial Zhu, I just got your sister Celestial Captus today. Looks like she's already a Celestial Sword Lady." Ji Yuhan thought of something and wanted to take out the sword case Xian just gave him from the dimensional pocket. The moment his mental power touched the dimensional pocket, Ji Yuhan felt dizzy. In a moment of carelessness, other than the sword case, another sword case fell out of the dimensional pocket together with the sword case. The 2 sword cases fell on the ground. The huge impact caused the lids of the 2 sword cases to open at the same time. 2 sword ladies fell out of the sword cases. Sigh. I didn't expect controlling green silk would consume so much mental power. It's messing up my thoughts. Guhan touched his forehead and smiled bitterly. He then bent down and picked up the 2 sword ladies that fell on the ground. Guhan looked at the 2 sword ladies. Yes, Celestial Captus in the left hand and Victory Sword in the right. Chapter 1346. This was probably the stupidest mistake Guhan had ever made in his life. After using up the severed black hair that his daughter had given him, he had successfully severed the Victory Sword scar. Due to the huge consumption of his mental power, Guhan, who was in a daze, had forgotten one important thing. When he had enough sword essence, there was a possibility that he could synchronize the Sword Maiden with the Sword Maiden in his hand. Most sword wielders would not have such a problem. Or rather, their real problem was that the Sword Maiden did not react at all when they held it in their hands. If they could synchronize the Sword Maiden with the Sword Maiden in their hands, it would be a great fortune for them. However, things were different for Guhan, especially since the Victory Sword had synchronized with Guhan once before. Therefore, when Guhan held the Victory Sword in his hands once again, something unexpected happened. Guhan's body began to petrify rapidly, and in the end, he turned into a stone statue. Guhan. This scene shocked all the sword maidens present. They stared dumbly at the petrified Guhan. After a while, Duyu asked weakly, "Big sisters, what's wrong with Big Brother? Is there even a need to look? He's petrified." Yi Tian rolled her eyes. To be more precise, Guhan has entered a synchronized state. Zhu Xian rubbed her nose and said with a pained expression, "What's going on?" Chijian's face was full of distress and helplessness. Hubby finally severed the Victory Sword scar and won his future freedom. Why is he trapped again? Sister Chijian, take a look and see which sword maiden coordinated with Ji Yuhan. Qing Pauper jumped out and asked with his eyes wide open. Isn't that obvious? It must be the Sword of Victory. Yi Tian knocked on Qing Pin's head and mocked him without holding back. The Sword of Victory has already been synchronized once. It wasn't easy for Guhan to cut off her sword mark, but in the end, he courted death and touched her again. Serves him right for having to synchronize a second time. If you don't believe me, you can touch the Victory Sword and see if it's petrified. If it's petrified, then it's definitely the Victory Sword. Oh. Qing Pin jumped to Guhan's side and touched the Victory Sword with her little hand as she said with an innocent look on her face, "It's true. The sword of victory really turned into stone. Master Mo Di once said that the great Tao is above. Everything in this world has its own destiny. It seems like the sword of victory is destined to be masters, just like how Juzi is destined to be masters. Juzi said her second sentence in these 2 chapters. I'm not worried about whether the sword of victory is destined to be Guhan's. I'm only worried about one thing. Before Chijian could finish her sentence, Qingpin's attention shifted from the sword of victory to the celestial entrapment sword. After touching it, she said in surprise, "Wow. Sister, celestial entrapment sword has also turned into stone. It's over. The worst has happened." Hearing Qingpin's words, Chijian's entire body instantly softened. Other than the simple-minded and ignorant Qingpin and Duyu, when the other sword maidens heard that the celestial entrapment sword had also turned into stone, their expressions immediately changed, and they touched the 2 swords one after another. Oh no! It seems like Guhan is synchronizing with the celestial entrapment sword and the victory sword at the same time. Yi Tian also felt a little dizzy. Thinking about the serious consequences of this matter, her entire body started to heat up and become fearful. Little sister Juexian. Little sister Zhuxian. Guhan. Guhan has 2 sword maidens at the same time. Guhan. Chijian stuttered for a long time, but in the end, she still did not say what she really wanted to ask. This was because Chijian was afraid of saying this out loud. Once it did, Chijian would immediately collapse. I'm sorry. This time, Guhan. He most likely won't survive. Zhuxian lowered her head. Although her tone was very calm, no one could see her expression at that moment. Big sister, why are you apologizing? It's not your fault that Guhan is seeking his own death. Juexian looked indifferent. In reality, she did not have much of a relationship with Guhan, and could be considered the weakest among all the sword maidens. He clearly knows that once he synchronizes with 2 sword maidens who are not twin sisters, it will definitely cause the sword marks in his body to go berserk, and in the end, his purple palace will explode and he will die. Yet, he stupidly touched the celestial entrapment sword and the victory sword at the same time. Isn't he seeking his own death? Juexian's sword shouted. Shut up. When Chijian, who was already feeling heartbroken, heard Zhuxian's words, he immediately roared, Jiyu Han is already being very careful. Jiyu Han only did this because he fell into a trance. I forbid you from scolding him. I said so. I said so. Slap. Before Juexian's sword could finish, a slap landed directly on her face. How dare you hit me? How dare you hit me, one of the 4 immortal sword? Juexian's sword touched her face in disbelief, then suddenly exploded. Juexian's sword immediately appeared in her hand, and she slashed at Chijian's head. F***CK. I'm not afraid of you. Chijian's sword was not afraid, and the Chijian sword in her hand also met the attack head-on. The 2 swords collided in the air. Chijian and Juexian's sword came out in a rage, and completely exploded with their strongest power. The entire room could not withstand the aftermath of such a violent collision, and an entire wall was directly knocked down, revealing the restaurant on the other side of the wall. Fortunately, because Guhan was synchronizing, there was no sword essence mixed in. Otherwise, if Chijian and Juexian's sword fought with all their might, the entire restaurant would probably be reduced to nothing. Enough Juexian, if anything happens to Guhan, we will all be finished. This world will be completely hopeless. Do you want to see the 4 of us sisters smashed into pieces? Now is not the time for you to rejoice in our misfortune. Juexian's sword snatched Juexian's sword from Juexian's sword's hand, and then directly slapped Juexian's sword's face. The sound was loud, even louder than Chijian's slap. I was wrong. After being slapped by her own sister, Juexian's sword came to its senses, and lowered its head to admit its mistake. Sister Juexian, we can only rely on you now. Do you have any ideas? Is there any way to save Guhan? Chijian walked to Juexian's sword's side, and was about to kneel down and beg Juexian's sword. Juexian's sword reacted quickly, and hugged Chijian, then shook its head helplessly. I really don't have any ideas. If there was really a way to help Guhan, I would not hesitate to give my life to Guhan. After all, when we betrayed the old master, we already gave up our lives. How could this be? Chijian's sword heard Juexian's sword's words, and became extremely helpless. I have an idea. I have an idea. Yi Tian, who was also anxious, suddenly shouted excitedly. Hearing Yi Tian's words, Chijian and the other sword ladies immediately surrounded Yi Tian, and asked her if she had any ideas. The thing that exploded was Guhan's purple palace, right? The purple palace is in Guhan's upper body, right? Actually, Guhan's head won't be in any danger, right? Yi Tian said excitedly, if we take advantage of the instant Guhan synchronization is successful, and the few seconds before his purple palace explodes, and cut off Guhan's head and put it in the medical pod, then Guhan won't have to die. As soon as Yi Tian said this idea, all the sword ladies present fell silent. This idea was simply too wild and imaginative. They would need to spend some time to properly accept this idea. This idea might be able to save Guhan's life for a while, and through the medical pod, Big Brother's body can indeed recover, but what will happen then? Duyu's little face scrunched up together as she asked. The destruction of the Purple Palace is irreversible. Once the Purple Palace is destroyed, even if the body recovers tens of thousands of times, the Purple Palace will no longer exist, and Guhan will lose his Purple Palace forever. Chijian's sword answered after a moment of silence. Then, what will happen to the 8 of us without the Purple Palace? Duyu asked again. We will return to our original form. Chijian's sword said calmly, we will return to being swords, fall into a deep sleep, and wait for the next sword wielder. Then, I don't want to. Duyu immediately shook her head and strongly refused. Ji Yun finally got to live with Big Brother again. Ji Yun wants to be with Big Brother forever. Ji Yun really wants to give birth to Big Brother's children. Ji Yun will never return to being a sword that can't do anything. Ji Yun also doesn't want to be the sword lady of another sword wielder. Be good. As long as Guhan's life can be saved, that's more important than anything else. Actually, I'm the same as you, I won't be able to accept any other sword wielder in the future, so let us fall into a deep sleep forever. Chijian's sword touched Duyu's little face, then ordered Juzi, who was behind it, Juzi, time is of the essence now, we don't know when Guhan will end the synchronization, go find Miss Lucihua immediately and bring her medical pod here. Quick. Juzi nodded and immediately left to carry out the order. Not long after, she returned with the medical pod and placed it next to Guhan. Next is the most important thing, when Guhan wakes up, who will cut off Guhan's head? Chijian's sword looked around at the rest of the sword ladies, none of them said anything, it was obvious that they did not want to do this. Then let me do it myself. Chijian's sword let out a long sigh, at the same time, it once again held the Chijian sword tightly in its hand. Using its own sword to cut off its lover's head was something that Chijian's sword had never imagined. What are you guys doing? Stop being so noisy. Poverty, who had been lying on Ji Yuhan's petrified body and treating Ji Yuhan as a playful toy, looked at the domineering and despairing Chiohan in front of him and asked in confusion. Chapter 1347. When Qing Pauper finished his sentence, Ji Yuhan, who had been petrified all this time, began to move. His skin was no longer the pale color of stone, but a pinkish blood color began to appear. Everyone get ready. Qi Dian took a deep breath and nervously gripped the hilt of his sword. He closed his eyes and placed one hand under Guhan's nose. Once Guhan regained his breath, Qi Dian would cut off Guhan's head. Suddenly, Qi Dian's finger felt a slight itch, and the tiny hairs on it began to flutter. The time had come. Forgive me, Guhan. 2 teardrops rolled down from the corner of Qi Dian's eyes, and the sword in his hand slashed towards Guhan's neck without hesitation. If Qi Dian's sword really landed on the unsuspecting Guhan's neck, then Guhan's head would really be separated from his body. At this critical moment, when the sword was less than 0.01 meters away from Guhan's neck, there was a crisp sound of the sword, and Qi Dian took a dozen steps back. Yi Tian caught him from behind. What? Are you trying to murder Master? A woman in white stood in front of Guhan, frowning, and said in an imposing Ling manner, Today, I will get rid of this evil for Master. I will kill you sword ladies who dare to rebel against your superiors. What a valiant and heroic heroine. It was a pity that she did not maintain her heroic image for long before she was forcefully held in someone's arms. She wailed, "My little sister, I'm not your little sister. My good little sister trapping immortal, we finally meet. Woo woo. Big sister missed you so much." As Juzian cried, she wiped the tears on her face on the heroine's chest, soaking her white feather robe. "Let me go. Stay away from me. You're not allowed to come near me." However, the heroine did not have the slightest awareness of being a younger sister, nor did she cry like Juzian. Instead, she pushed Juzian's head, trying her best to push him away from her embrace. "Get out of my way, you two. If you don't let me save Guhan, it'll be too late." Chijien came back to its senses and roared in sorrow. It picked up its Chijien sword and was about to cut off Guhan's head again. "All right. I'm fine. Don't even think about hitting my head." In the next second, Guhan's voice rang out from behind the celestial captive sword. Then, he walked out unsteadily. Although Guhan's complexion didn't look good, his other aspects were still normal. There were no signs of his body breaking down. "Husband. It's great that you're all right. Woo woo woo." Chijien threw the Chijien sword in its hand away and threw itself into Guhan's embrace, crying unrestrainedly. For the past 10 minutes, a huge amount of pressure had been piling up in Chijien's heart. Now that everything had come to an end, Chijien had completely let go of herself, and all the tears that had accumulated in her heart gushed out. All right. I didn't even blame you for wanting to cut off my head, so why are you crying?" Guhan smiled as he wiped away the tears at the corner of Chijien's eyes. After hearing Guhan's words, Chijien felt even more ashamed, and its face became even more ashamed. "And thank you, Lady Captive Immortal. If it wasn't for you, my head would have been separated from my body." Fleeting Maple patted the celestial captive sword beside him with a smile. "Protect Master. This is the duty of the celestial captive sword, and I dare not accept Master's praise." The celestial captive sword replied respectfully. This celestial captive sword is completely different from her sisters. Guhan could not help but exclaim in his heart when he saw the celestial captive sword's reaction. The celestial extinguish sword was like a bomb buried beside him, and he did not know when it would explode. While the celestial bane sword was slightly better than the celestial extinguish sword, it was extremely indifferent. It was not to say that it was perfunctory towards Guhan, but it was simply to complete its own task. It was definitely not loyal or professional. Compared to these two masters, the immortal trapping sword sisters were completely different when they appeared. They gave off a sense of loyalty and trust. They were all twins, but why was there such a huge difference? Me. Heartless fellow. You don't even want your own sister now that you have a man. The celestial extinguish sword grumbled unhappily. Guhan, what's going on? Why are you completely fine? Didn't you say that if you are unable to synchronize your two sisters, your mind palace will explode and you will die? Chijien asked curiously. I also don't know why. Guhan smiled bitterly and said, but the fact is that the victory sword and the celestial captive sword's sword mark are now in my mind palace, and there is no conflict between them. Otherwise, I would rather you cut off my head. All right. Then let's not care about these things for now. Chijien shook its head and threw aside the questions that it could not understand. At the same time, it wiped away the tears on its face and put on a curious expression and asked, Guhan, you said that the victory sword and the celestial captive sword's sword mark are in your mind palace. Then what about the victory sword? Where is she now? Why is she not out? I am here. Can't you see me? Guhan replied. What do you mean, husband? Why don't I understand? Chijien felt that there were more than 10 crows flying over its head at the same time. It could not understand what Guhan meant at all. I am here. Guhan smiled and said, isn't the victory sword you were asking about here? What? It wasn't just Chijien. All the sword maidens present felt a chill run down their spines when they heard this. Who gave you the right to pretend to be me? At that moment, a hand grabbed Guhan's shoulder from behind and pulled Guhan back. At the same time, a pale Guhan appeared from behind Guhan. Nice to meet you all. I'm very sorry to have played a small joke on you all. Let me introduce myself. I am the victory sword, but I hope that everyone will call me Guxuan Yuan. The victory sword stood in front of the sword ladies and said with a smile. Two big brothers. Du Yu was frightened by the victory sword's appearance and said with a trembling body. In fact, in this room, other than the 4 immortal banishing swords and Qing Pin, all the sword ladies in the room looked confused. I am not the big brother. I am the big sister. The victory sword stroked his hair with both hands, and his short hair, which was the same as Guhan's, instantly turned into long, black hair. His flat chest also began to expand rapidly, and finally became the size of a D cup. Although the victorious sword's appearance was still the same as before, she seemed to have transformed into a beautiful and adorable girl with her long hair and voluptuous breasts. Isn't this your transformation, husband, transformation? Chidian stuttered, unable to finish his sentence. That's right. This is the appearance of a woman that I became because of the side effects of the 6 transformations immortal pill. This is Guxuan Yuan. There were also a few crows circling above Ji Yuhan's head. Ji Yuhan had never thought that the Sword of Victory would actually become like this after it was synchronized. Silence. The entire room was silent. When the sword ladies saw the male and female Ji Yuhan appear in front of them, after the initial shock, their cheeks puffed up and their faces were filled with smiles that were on the verge of bursting out. If not for the fact that Guhan's expression was not good, these sword ladies would have laughed maniacally. Laugh if you want. Even if you don't laugh today, you will still laugh tomorrow. As long as you are happy. Guhan waved his hand, as if he could not bear to see his sword ladies continue to hold back their laughter. Ha 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 ha. In the next second, the entire room was filled with deafening laughter. All the sword ladies, including Chidian, were laughing so hard that they almost went crazy. Tell me about it. Why did you turn into me? After the deafening laughter in the room ended, Ji Yuhan looked at Victory Sword, who was also laughing and chatting non-stop. He did not feel that he was one of the protagonists being mocked. Master, you are too heartless. You didn't apologize to me first, and you want me to explain so many things to you. I am not happy. The Victory Sword pouted and said coquettishly. At the same time, there was a hint of seduction. Seeing a woman who looked almost identical to him showing a flirtatious expression, Guhan was very calm, and he did not seem to be disturbed at all. If you are talking about my intention to cut off your sword mark, then I apologize to you. However, I have already told you about my situation. If I do not cut off your sword mark, I will die. I hope you can understand. Guhan said calmly. His words did not sound like he was apologizing. Forget it. I can't be bothered to argue with you. The Victory Sword rolled her eyes at Guhan. Master, don't tell me you have forgotten the first time you synchronized with me. Of course I remember. Guhan nodded. At that time, I took a little bit of the 6 transformations elixir and reached the level of a celestial sword wielder in a short 5 seconds. Then, I borrowed your strength to kill Hyla. However, because it was only 5 seconds, you returned to your sword form. Bingo. The Victory Sword snapped her fingers and said, however, you forgot to mention one thing. After the synchronization was successful, there was still my half-developed embryo left in your body. It was not just a sword mark. Then, you took the whole 6 transformations elixir in one go and gave birth to the body of Ji Yuan, right? Then, you borrowed the strength of the Shenyuan sword granny to become Ji Yuan and defeat the Nether River Patriarch, right? That's right. Guhan nodded again. Do you think that body of Ji Yuan came for nothing? The Victory Sword snorted coldly. Actually, that was my embryo that had not formed yet. It was just that the Shenyuan sword granny forcefully developed and transformed it into Ji Yuan. Then, this body merged with your bloodline. This is the origin of Ji Yuan's identity. Ji Yuan is me, and I am Ji Yuan. Understood. Guhan nodded. So, the culprit was the Shenyuan sword granny. Chapter 1348. Little sister, let's be reasonable. I'm obviously your good sister. I don't care even if I'm your good sister, but how can you call me grandma? This is wrong. Before Guhan could summon the Xian Yuan sword, the Xian Yuan sword jumped out of the dimensional pocket and said to the victory sword with great dissatisfaction, "I'm not wrong. Mother is mother, I'm mother's mother, so of course, Xian Yuan sword is your grandma." The victory sword's words made sense, and the Xian Yuan sword was speechless. It could only keep waving its sword in the air and threaten, "Okay. You'll tear the tiles if you're not beaten for 3 days. Let's see how I deal with this unfilial granddaughter." "That's good. I also want to settle the score with you. If you didn't play tricks on my embryo, how could I become like this? I'm an immortal sword lady, and you're an emperor sword without a master. Do you think I'll be afraid of you?" The victory sword said, not to be outdone. "Enough, all of you shut up." Guhan suppressed all the quarrels with one sentence. He then controlled the angry Xian Yuan sword in his hand and asked with a cold face, "Did you already expect what happened today? You already knew that Jiyu Xuanyuan's body is actually the body of the victory sword." "You can't say that." The Xian Yuan sword snorted. "Jiyu Xuanyuan's body is actually your body. To put it bluntly, Jiyu Xuanyuan's body is still separated from your body. Otherwise, how could she look exactly the same as you? Your bodies are actually the same. Even if you go to test your DNA now, except for the X and Y chromosomes, all your chromosomes are exactly the same. How should I put it? You're the closest pair of twin brother and sister, a dragon and a phoenix. Twin brother and sister." Hearing the Xian Yuan sword's words, Guhan's face became a little better. Twin brother and sister was already the best result. It was better than 2 Guhans. "Also, I'm taking this matter seriously now. I'm filled with righteous indignation. I'm furious. I'm going to perish together with you. I'm telling you, you shouldn't blame me for this matter. Instead, you should thank me. Otherwise, you would have already died from the explosion of your purple palace." It could be seen that the Xian Yuan sword was really in a bad mood. Otherwise, it wouldn't have thrown out so many idioms. "What do you mean?" Guhan's expression became tense. "PH, if I hadn't shattered the embryo of the victory sword and fused it with your body, how could you have prevented the celestial trapping sword and the victory sword sword scar from not reacting? It's because the embryo of the victory sword has mixed with your own flesh and blood to become the body of the victory sword. Therefore, the victory sword is the same as the Qi Dian sword. In terms of origin, it has already fused with your body. You are the twin brother and sister of the Qi Dian sword. That's why the sword scar of the celestial trapping sword didn't have any reaction to the sword scar of the victory sword. Because she thinks that the sword scar of the victory sword is a part of your Zifu, she doesn't know the existence of the victory sword." "I see." Guhan nodded. He believed that the Xian Yuan sword wouldn't lie to him about this. At the same time, he understood why the victory sword could live in harmony with the sword mark of the celestial captive sword. "Wait. Grandma Xian Yuan sword. This means that even if Guhan didn't use the green sever silk, he wouldn't have to worry about the victory sword. So, this precious green sever silk was wasted just like that," the heavenly sword said with a pained expression. "Oh my God, how much could 1 green sever silk be sold for? How much red star erguitu could I buy with this money? It's all gone. Oh, it's all gone. Don't worry. Even if Guhan sold the green sever silk, he wouldn't buy you red star erguitu," the celestial extinguished sword said while pinching the heavenly sword's butt. "Don't call me grandma. Otherwise, I'll kill you." The heavenly sword didn't even have time to get angry at the celestial extinguished sword before the Xian Yuan sword roared angrily. The victory sword immediately shrunk its head and didn't dare to say anything else. It was 2 against 1, and they were both emperor swords. It really couldn't win. Also, this green sever silk wasn't wasted. Don't forget, the sword mark left in the purple palace wasn't the sword mark after the embryo fused. It was the sword mark left after the victory sword and Guhan synchronized for the first time. In fact, it was the original sword mark of the victory sword. If the celestial trap sword's sword mark saw the original sword mark, there would be a fierce battle. By then, Guhan, your purple palace would still be finished. The Xian Yuan sword said with a humph. "All right. I understand what you're trying to say." Guhan nodded and said, "Now, please go back to your rooms. I'm sleepy." I want to sleep. After Guhan said this, he collapsed on the bed and fell asleep. Guhan was really too tired. When Guhan slept until the sun was high up in the sky and he still wanted more, a hurried doorbell woke Guhan up. Great Sun Sword Immortal. What a rare guest. Why are you looking for me so early in the morning? Guhan, who was wearing pajamas, opened the door and saw an anxious Great Sun Sword Immortal standing at his door. He looked like he wanted to eat Guhan up. Your Majesty, let me ask you something. You must answer me honestly. This concerns the glory and future of our Yangjing city for thousands of years, the Great Sun Sword Immortal said hurriedly. He squeezed into the room, and then he was stunned. I say, Your Majesty, did you have a big fight with your 8 sword maidens yesterday? Why did the walls collapse? The Great Sun Sword Immortal looked at the half-collapsed wall in front of him and said in a daze. This broken wall was actually the result of the clash between the Qi Dian sword and the Celestial Extinguishing sword yesterday. Of course, Ji Yuhan could not tell the Great Sun Sword Immortal the truth. He only said lightly, yesterday, I comprehended some sword techniques while thinking hard. I could not control the vigorous sword Qi, and accidentally leaked some of it out. When the time comes, the walls of this hotel will be destroyed. But don't worry, Great Sun Sword Immortal. If you are here for this broken wall, I will pay all the repair fees to you. I promise not to damage Yangjing City's official business. No, it's just a broken wall, who cares? The Great Sun Sword Immortal quickly waved his hands. He did not even know that the wall was damaged. How could he have come to find Guhan because of this wall? Then why is Great Sun Jendi here? Guhan said with a smile. Actually, looking at the Great Sun Sword Immortal's anxious expression, Guhan had already guessed what the Great Sun Sword Immortal wanted to do. This was also within Guhan's expectations. Your Majesty, I have a question that you must answer me honestly. This concerns the glory and future of our Yangjing city for thousands of years. The Great Sun Sword Immortal said anxiously. Stop. Guhan pressed the Great Sun Sword Immortal down. Lord Sword Immortal, this is the second time you've said this. If you have something to say, say it. I am from Yuzhang City. Yangjing City's glory and future have never had anything to do with our Yuzhang City. Brother Guhan, you're treating me like an outsider. Our Yangjing City and Yuzhang City are one. Everyone's glory and future are together. Don't say such things that make people doubt your status. The Great Sun Sword Immortal said with a smile. I say, Lord Sword Immortal, what do you want to say? Say it now, don't beat around the bush with me. I'm still sleepy. If there's nothing else, I'm going back to sleep. Guhan's face showed signs of impatience. All right, then I'll say it. The Great Sun Sword Immortal gritted his teeth. This morning, His Majesty Longsha told me that when you were in London, Your Majesty snuck into the Glastonbury stronghold of the Martyr's Palace and obtained a portion of the innate sword ladies that the traitor stole from Yangjing City's sword garret. Is this true? The Great Sun Sword Immortal finally asked the question that had been hidden in his heart. This was indeed the most important thing to Yangjing City. Since the rebellion 2 years ago, Yangjing City's reputation had hit rock bottom. Nearly a tenth of the innate sword ladies had been stolen from the sword garret by a traitor. This was the greatest humiliation Yangjing City had ever suffered in the past 1,000 years. If not for Hao Tianjendi, who was still alive and well, supporting Great Sun Sword Immortal, the Great Sun Sword Immortal might have already resigned from his position as the chairman of the Yangjing City Sword Committee. He might even become the greatest sinner of Yangjing City and be cursed by countless descendants. Thus, these lost innate sword ladies had always been a huge boulder on Great Sun Sword Immortal's chest. For the past 2 years, the Great Sun Sword Immortal had been unable to breathe. The Great Sun Sword Immortal sent out almost all of the elite swordbearers in Yangjing City to gather information about the missing natural sword ladies. In the end, they really did find something. The Great Sun Sword Immortal personally took action and captured a universe-grade bandit from the Martyr's Palace. From him, he found out that the missing natural sword ladies were in the Glastonbury stronghold. But after hearing this news, the Great Sun Sword Immortal was in despair. Glastonbury was the most important stronghold of the Martyr's Palace in the human world, guarded by 3 flood-grade Yuan Ku. If Hao Tianzhendi hadn't weakened, then with the power of 2 Zhendi, it might have been possible to break through the defenses of the Glastonbury stronghold and take back the lost innate sword ladies. But Hao Tianzhendi had already fallen into a weakened state, and Longsha Zhendi was particularly stingy with his power. He was unwilling to agree to Yangjing City's request, and there had been no progress in the past 2 years. The Great Sun Sword Immortal had reached the end of his patience. He planned to gather all the immortal grade swordbearers in Yangjing City together, and then use some of Yangjing City's trump cards to enter the Glastonbury stronghold. Even if he had to sacrifice the lives of 5 or 6 immortal grade swordbearers, he had to rescue the innate sword ladies. Otherwise, he, the Great Sun Sword Immortal, would not die in peace. Chapter 1349. Well, the item is indeed with me, Guhan said with a conflicted and hesitant expression. When the Great Sun Sword Immortal heard Guhan's words, he heaved a sigh of relief. He was afraid that Guhan wouldn't admit that the natural sword ladies were with Guhan. This was because only Guhan and Li Bai knew about Guhan's infiltration of the Glastonbury outpost. Li Bai was with Guhan. If Guhan insisted that he didn't get anything from the outpost, then the Great Sun Sword Immortal really wouldn't have any evidence to prove that the item was with Guhan. Perhaps when the time came, Yuanko of the Martyr's Palace would jump out and say that Ji Yuhan had stolen those natural sword ladies, but as long as Ji Yuhan insisted that this was Yuanko's ploy, purposely to sow discord between him and Yangjing City, and incite civil strife among humans, then the Great Sun Sword Immortal would still have no evidence to prove this. So if Guhan didn't admit it, the Great Sun Sword Immortal really wouldn't be able to do anything. Now that Guhan had admitted it, it was easy. Actually, the Great Sun Sword Immortal already had 3 cameras on him to record his conversation with Guhan. This would be used as evidence in the future. As long as Guhan admitted it now, it would be irrefutable evidence. Guhan wouldn't be able to deny it even if he wanted to. That's great. That's great. Your Majesty, please return the item to us. A few drops of tears flowed from the corner of the Great Sun Sword Immortal's eyes. He then stretched out his empty hand and placed it in front of Guhan. Return what to you? Guhan looked confused. This made the Great Sun Sword Immortal's heart clench. He immediately said nervously, "Of course it's the natural sword ladies that your Majesty saved. These natural sword ladies originally belonged to Yangjing City. Naturally, they should be returned to their rightful owners." "Oh, so that's how it is." Guhan nodded, and a playful smile appeared on his face. "You people from Yangjing City really have a good plan. You want to ask me to take the things away without any evidence. You can't do this, right? I understand." The Great Sun Sword Immortal's face revealed a hint of bitterness. It seemed like his initial plan to take back the item without paying anything had been a little too good. Guhan had taken the item back, and he had not done anything in return. That was indeed a little too petty. "Forget it, since the responsibility is on me, I'll settle it myself." Therefore, the Great Sun Sword Immortal said solemnly and righteously, "Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor's great kindness, I, the Great Sun Sword Immortal, will never forget. From now on, Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor's matters are my matters. Even if Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor, wants my life, I will not dare to disobey. From now on, if Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor has any orders, as long as I, the Great Sun Sword Immortal, am still alive, I will definitely not refuse." The Great Sun Sword Immortal's words sounded righteous and unyielding, as if he was offering himself up to the Sea Emperor. But in reality, the Great Sun Sword Immortal knew very well that these were just words that sounded nice. Did Ji Yuhan have the guts to order him around, to make him, the chairman of the Yangjing City Sword Committee, work for him with his life on the line? This kind of thing might happen once or twice, but if it happened too many times, not to mention what kind of discussions it would cause in society, even Guhan himself would feel embarrassed. Therefore, the Great Sun Sword Immortal believed that Guhan would not give him too many orders. It was even possible that he would not give any orders at all. As for the reason, it was very simple. It was because Guhan's strength was too high. As a spiritual sword-level sword wielder, he was only second to an emperor sword-level sword wielder. From the looks of it, it would be a piece of cake for Guhan to become an immortal sword-level sword wielder. And when Guhan became an immortal sword, his strength would probably be comparable to an emperor sword-level sword wielder. Although he was the strongest among the immortal sword-level sword wielder, compared to Guhan's strength, there was already a huge gap. If he could do it, so could Guhan. There was no need for him to trouble him. And if even Guhan could not do it, then it was even more impossible for him to do it. Guhan would not use this kind of thing to make things difficult for him. Therefore, although the Great Sun Sword Immortal's words sounded very beautiful, they did not mean much. The Great Sun Sword Immortal felt that he would at most be ordered around by Guhan once or twice. Such a simple condition in exchange for all the natural sword ladies. No matter how you looked at it, it was a good deal. Moreover, this also sounded very prestigious. The dignified chairman of the Yangjing City Sword Committee took the initiative to give himself to envoy Ji Han. How much face did he give to Ji Han? After hearing this condition, shouldn't he happily return the things to him? Unfortunately, the Great Sun Sword Immortal was wrong. Because Guhan was not someone who would be fooled by such superficial things. What the Great Sun Sword Immortal could think of, how could it be hidden from Guhan's eyes? There's no need to say more. This doesn't mean much to me. To put it bluntly, I don't think much of the Great Sun Sword Immortal's ability, Guhan said indifferently. And this unceremonious and merciless sentence made the Great Sun Sword Immortal's face turn as black as a large piece of rag. Your Majesty, what do you mean? The Great Sun Sword Immortal said darkly. Great Sun Sword Immortal, do you not understand what I mean? Should I say it directly? Guhan looked at the Great Sun Golden Immortal's clothes, which were decorated with many transparent gems, and smiled. If I say the truth, it won't be good if it's recorded in a video. This guy knows I have a video camera on me. The Great Sun Sword Immortal was shocked. At the same time, his body felt a little cold. In order to hide the small video camera on him, he had specially chosen this set of clothes with all kinds of gems. He did not expect that Guhan would see through it. However, the Great Sun Sword Immortal was not willing to be attacked by Guhan just like that. Right now, Guhan was still a spiritual sword rank sword wielder, and he was still an immortal sword rank sword wielder. He did not believe that his strength was really useless against Guhan. Your Majesty, I may not be as strong as Your Majesty, but I'm sure there's a limit to the difference. Your Majesty, please have a try with me. If my strength is really too far from Your Majesty's, then I won't dare to shamelessly say that I can help Your Majesty. Great Sun Sword Immortal said. Interesting. Guhan revealed a playful smile. Then may I ask, Great Sun Sword Immortal, what kind of difference would be considered limited? This. The Great Sun Sword Immortal was a little hesitant. It was easy to say this, but it was difficult to put it into practice. The Great Sun Sword Immortal really did not know what kind of difference would be considered limited. The book did not mention how much difference there was between an immortal sword rank and a spiritual sword rank sword wielder. No, the book did mention it, but it said that an immortal sword rank sword wielder was much stronger than a spiritual sword rank sword wielder, but it did not say how much stronger a spiritual sword rank sword wielder would be compared to an immortal sword wielder. At this thought, the Great Sun Sword Immortal felt his face burning. He was probably the first immortal sword wielder in history to think about the difference in strength between him and a spiritual sword wielder, but the Great Sun Sword Immortal had no choice but to consider this question. Because when they had attacked Ji Han on the street, although all the immortal sword-bearers had held back and not used their true strength, they had still used at least 50% of their strength. From that moment on, the Great Sun Sword Immortal knew that he was no match for Ji Han. Sir, you've thought for so long, it's time for you to give me an answer, Guhan's voice urged in the Great Sun Sword Immortal's ear. 3, 2, 1 hour. If I can last an hour against Your Majesty the Sea King, then it means that Your Majesty the Sea King and I aren't too far apart in strength. What do you think, Your Majesty the Sea King? The Great Sun Sword Immortal said through gritted teeth. Under normal circumstances, It was normal for two immortal sword wielder to fight for 3 days and 3 nights. But in his own words, there was only 1 hour left. Although this was said by the great Sun Sword Immortal himself, the great Sun Sword Immortal still felt very ashamed. 1 hour. Guhan's expression became non-committal. Even a week ago, if he used all his strength, the great Sun Sword Immortal would not be able to last an hour, let alone now. Sir, I've just crawled out of bed, and you want me to fight you? That's a little inappropriate. How about this? I'll show you something. After you see it, if you think it's about the same as mine, then I'll fight you. Guhan said with a smile. All right. Although the great Sun Sword Immortal did not know what Guhan had up his sleeve, he still agreed readily. Millimeter. Guhan smiled and nodded. Today, I'll invite the great Sun Sword Immortal to have a look at my sword maidens. As Guhan spoke, he clapped his hands. From all the rooms in the presidential suite flew out blinding rays of sword light. When all the sword lights stopped, the great Sun Sword Immortal realized that there were sword maidens floating beside Guhan. This Guhan, why is he showing off his sword maidens now? The great Sun Sword Immortal muttered. With an awkward smile, he said to Guhan, Your Majesty, I know you have a lot of sword maidens. You don't have to take them out to embarrass me. No, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I just want you to count how many sword maidens I have. Guhan smiled. What's there to count? Everyone in this world knows that Your Majesty has 8 sword maidens. The great Sun Sword Immortal said, confused. Count them. It's not too late to count before you speak. Guhan squinted his eyes and said, This, all right. The great Sun Sword Immortal was helpless. Since Guhan had requested this, he could only do as he was told. Then he carefully looked at the sword maidens floating in front of him, and then beads of sweat covered the great Sun Sword Immortal's face. Chapter 1350. 10. It's 10. When the great Sun Sword Immortal counted the number of sword maidens floating beside Guhan, his forehead was covered in sweat. If he had not known that Guhan was the wielder of the dual sword maidens, the great Sun Sword Immortal would have thought that Guhan had broken through the heavens and surpassed the 6 sword maidens of an emperor sword wielder. He had reached a level that no one had ever reached before. But now Guhan had 10 sword maidens. What did this mean? Didn't this mean that Guhan was already a celestial sword wielder? The great Sun Sword Immortal started to wipe the sweat off his forehead. He had thought that he could last an hour against Guhan. Now that Guhan was a celestial sword wielder, he might not even last 5 minutes, let alone an hour. Guhan was right. He was not attractive to Guhan at all now. If the situation was dangerous to the point where Guhan needed his help, then he would only be sending himself to his death. The reason was simple. If it was an opponent that Guhan could not defeat, then he would only be sending himself to his death. Thinking of this, the great Sun Sword Immortal's previous words were all for naught. The great Sun Sword Immortal carefully calculated his trump card, and sadly found that he didn't even have a single condition that could attract Guhan. What was worse was that even if he did not hold back and let all the immortal sword rank swordbearers in Yangjing City act to forcefully threaten Guhan, considering the strength of both sides, unless the Clear Sky Sword Emperor also acted, it was likely that all the immortal sword rank swordbearers in Yangjing City would not be able to defeat Guhan. Not to mention that the state of the Clear Sky Sword Emperor was extremely bad, his lifespan was on the verge of death, and he could die at any time. After this fight, the Clear Sky Sword Emperor would probably die in advance. More importantly, this would trigger the biggest internal strife in human history in Yangjing City, and the entire Yangjing City would become the culprit of destroying human harmony. The great Sun Sword Immortal would not do such a thing. Even if he did not want these natural sword maidens, he would not fight Guhan. But the problem was, what trump card did he have to make a deal with Guhan? The only thing that reassured the great Sun Sword Immortal was that while Guhan's words were very displeasing, he could see that Guhan still wanted to negotiate. This meant that Guhan actually had some thoughts and was willing to return the natural sword maidens to Yangjing City. This was what Yangjing City had to fight for. But in this way, the control of the entire negotiation was completely in the hands of Guhan. All Yangjing City could do was to passively accept Ji Han's request. They didn't even have the right to refuse. Great Sun Sword Immortal, why aren't you saying anything? Do you still want to spar with me? Gu Han asked slyly. I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare. The Great Sun Sword Immortal waved his hands. At the same time, he sighed in his heart. As the chairman of Yangjing City's Sword Committee, when did he become so cowardly? Yuzhang City's luck was too good. 100 years ago, they had just produced the powerful Jiyu Jin Jendi. Now, an even more terrifying Jendi, Gu Han, was about to appear. What was going on? Thinking of this, the Great Sun Sword Immortal unconsciously glanced at the 10 sword maidens floating beside Gu Han. His entire body trembled. A terrifying thought suddenly appeared in his mind. With 2 more sword maidens, this Gu Han had already ascended to the throne. Who knew? Thus, the Great Sun Sword Immortal asked weakly, Your Majesty, what level of sword wielder are you now? Great Sun Sword Immortal, you worry too much. Seeing the Great Sun Sword Immortal's slightly panicked expression, Gu Han said calmly, I have less than 10 million quarks in my body. I'm not fated to become the Honorable Emperor Sword Maidens. That's good no. That's great. Your Majesty, it seems like you can control 2 Emperor Sword Maidens at the same time. Your might will shake the world and surpass Zetian. It's only a matter of time. Poor Great Sun Sword Immortal. Even his words became careful. He even had to flatter Gu Han against his will, afraid that his words would anger Gu Han. Seeing the Great Sun Sword Immortal's aggrieved expression, Gu Han also knew that he could not put on too much of a show. If he continued acting like this, it would cause great indignation in Yangjing City. This would not be harmonious for the future of humanity. Alright, actually, I was planning to return these natural sword maidens to Yangjing City. It's just that I've encountered so many things along the way. I feel a little aggrieved, so I have no choice but to put on a show. Ji Han said with a smile, and this sentence made the Great Sun Sword Immortal feel much more at ease. Next, as long as he obediently accepted Gu Han's conditions, these natural sword maidens that Yangjing City had lost could all be returned. Your Majesty, please tell me what you want. The main thing is that I will give you whatever Yangjing City can give you. The Great Sun Sword Immortal hurriedly expressed his stance. Since all the initiative was in Gu Han's hands, he might as well do Gu Han a favor. Perhaps he could make Gu Han feel guilty and lower his own conditions. First, the Sword Committee will be re-elected next year, right? Gu Han said with a smile. Yes. The Sword Committee is re-elected every 5 years. Each time, the Immortal and Emperor Sword Maidens vote to choose the committee chairman and secretary. The Immortal and Emperor Sword Maidens have 1 vote, and the Emperor Sword Maidens have 5 votes. The current chairman of the Sword Committee is Yangjing City's Hao Tian Jendi. However, Hao Tian Jendi's body condition is too bad. He will not be re-elected. So this time, the chairman should be Longsha Jendi. The Great Sun Sword Immortal nodded and said. At the same time, his heart moved. Could it be that Gu Han wanted the position of the chairman of the Sword Committee? The position of chairman of the Sword Committee was not a good one, either. After all, the 8 base cities were decided by the Sword Committee of the 8 base cities. The Sword Committee could only offer suggestions on macro control and had no right to intervene in the specific affairs of the base cities. As for other major events that needed to be decided by the Sword Committee and were related to the whole human race, they couldn't be decided by the president alone. They needed to be discussed and decided by the Sword Committee. From this point of view, the president of the Sword Committee was more like a beautiful vase. However, it would be a big mistake to say that the chairman of the Sword Committee was not a good one. The chairman of the Sword Committee was the highest leader of the human race in name. It was equivalent to the President of the United States or the Chairman of the Celestial Empire. It was the highest position in the entire human race. Regardless of whether this position had the right or not, to be able to sit in this position was the greatest honor in the world. Not only could he boast for the rest of his life, his descendants could boast for 10 lifetimes. Although all the orders of the Sword Committee were decided by the members of the Sword Committee, the chairman of the Sword Committee had the right to veto. In other words, if the Sword Committee felt that this matter was wrong, even if the other sword holders agreed, the chairman of the Sword Committee had the right to veto it. Moreover, when there was a crisis that concerned the future of the human race, the Sword Committee had the power to force the 8 base cities to listen to the orders of the Sword Committee unconditionally. All the resources and manpower of the 8 base cities would be allocated to the Sword Committee. For example, during the Battle of the Alps, the Sword Committee was in charge of all the resources and swordbearers of the 8 base cities. Even the Emperor swordbearers had to listen to the orders of the Sword Committee unconditionally. That was how they managed to work together and avoid a huge crisis for the human race. Once the human race was in a very passive situation and needed someone to decide, the chairman of the Sword Committee had the right to gather all the decision-making power in his hands. Without any discussion, he could directly command the human race according to his own orders and will. When that time came, the chairman of the Sword Committee would be the most powerful person in the human race. He could directly control the fate of every human. In general, the chairman of the Sword Committee was usually just for show. Sometimes, he could be a troublemaker, but at the most crucial time, he could become the supreme existence in the world. All along, other than a few times, the position of chairman of the Sword Committee had been monopolized by the Emperor swordholders in Yangjing City. The reason was simple. The number of immortal-level sword wielders in Yangjing City was usually the highest among the 8 base cities. As long as Yangjing City did not cause public anger among the 8 base cities, it was extremely easy to push their Emperor sword wielders to the position of chairman of the Sword Committee through voting rights. For example, since the death of the powerful Jiyu Jin Jendi, the position of chairman of the Sword Committee had been held by 2 generations of Emperor sword holders in Yangjing City for close to 70 years. This was the second longest continuous holding in history. The Great Sun Sword Immortal wanted to break the record of 170 consecutive years when the Sword Committee was established. He didn't expect Guhan to use this as a bargaining chip to threaten him. His Majesty the Sea King wants Yangjing City to support His Majesty to be the chairman of the Sword Committee. The Great Sun Sword Immortal decided to go all out. Anyway, it would take at least 5 years for Guhan to ascend to the throne. After 5 years, no one in the world would be Guhan's match. Then, even if he didn't vote for Guhan, Guhan would still be able to ascend to the position of Emperor sword holders. Yangjing City actually didn't suffer too much. Thus, the Great Sun Sword Immortal gritted his teeth and said, "Okay. If His Majesty the Sea King wants it, then as long as His Majesty ascends to the throne, Yangjing City will definitely support His Majesty the Sea King to take over as chairman of the Sword Committee. His Majesty the Sea King will definitely be able to ascend to the position." Wrong. Guhan shook his head. "It's not waiting for me to become an Emperor sword holder. It's going to happen next year. Whatever sword holder I will be next year, you have to support my person to ascend to the position of chairman of the Sword Committee." You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,